Good evening, everyone. It is 7 o'clock. My name is David Pollock, and this is a public hearing of the Moderators Committee on Outdoor Lighting. And this, is more or less a continuation of a hearing that we had last night. And this is maybe our 8th meeting, and we have a quorum. I am joined by committee members, David Trevette, Matthew Hyatt, Bill Heineman, Pat Mayer, and Elisa Plazanja. And we have a couple other members who will probably join us. And we're joined, I see, by Debbie. Tell us your name.
It's Hatsia Leftheriadis, but Debbie's fine. Everybody knows me as Debbie Hats.
Debbie Hatsa Leftheriadis.
Very good.
Wow, I've never mastered it.
I for many years I taught with a colleague named whose name was Lefteri, but that was the same Lefteri, but it is his first name.
Okay. Yep. Phonetically, it's exactly as written, but people they see all that and go, ah.
So many letters.
Yep. 18.
Great. And then 3 other members of the public who also happen to be advisory committee members with me, Fran and Jocelyn and Brian Ladd. And we're joined by Julie Jetty, who's a member of the committee, Marion Lazar, Narcissa Campion. I'm reading them because for the minutes, Zoom doesn't capture the Hollywood squares. You don't ever get the picture of the whole group, which is a limitation. And Michael Kirstein. So I think that may be all 9 of us. I'm not sure.
Ariel just popped in.
Ariel's here.
8 of us, right? Ariel and 9 of us. Great. Okay. So we did excellent work last night, primarily with DPW and working through some of the more pithy questions before us. We hadn't quite gotten to going line by line back through, which I'm hoping we'll get to tonight. But I would suggest to the committee that a way to start would be simply to have, Elisa has integrated the newest revised comments from Jocelyn Murphy into the document we were working with last night. And so my suggestion is that we, Elisa, share the document, and then we open the floor to you, Jocelyn, and we can just start at the beginning, and you can introduce your comments as we see them, and if they're not quite captured right, you can obviously editorialize and fill them in, and then also the committee can potentially process them in real time, so that we can. I think some of them are suggestions that we may say, oh, that text makes sense or something. They're easy, and then Elisa can, but we can see the text. So does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah,
David, it does. I just wanted to confirm, I don't think that most recent thing from Elisa made its way onto the town website for tonight's meeting.
It didn't. I made what could be a questionable decision, which was we've published so many documents and so many of them are very long. And I think there's a point at which the public can't process anymore. And to just keep having like 6 new documents every day when we're meeting day to day, we will get them all in the record for sure. And we're going to discuss them tonight. And it's,
Sure.
And anyway, yes.
I just wanted to mention it because members of the public will not have an available copy the way they might have been used to from the town's website. So that I just
and it's it's going to be very close to the document that we worked with last night, and that is already posted. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. So Lisa, I have to make you a co-host, I think.
Right.
Well, okay, host tools. Where are the host tools? Oh, there they are. No, that's not what I do. I have to right click on your image and make you a co-host.
And could I just throw out very quickly, the point of this revision was, I was unable to attend last night's meeting, except for the very end, and I just heard a few comments from Alexandra, and maybe a follow-up question or two. So just to explain to the group, this revision really responds to the very tail end of the conversation that I was able to pick up on, and I have not seen what was discussed at the rest of the meeting.
Okay. So David, you would like me to just jump ahead to Jocelyn's comments?
Yeah, I think that's okay. I mean, it's kind of exactly where we left off yesterday, processing, uh, uh, recreational and athletic facilities and open space and getting to parks and all of that. Yeah.
So, as we, for those who were here yesterday, you may remember that we had a lot of discussion around curfew and in particular differences between the curfew that were otherwise will be imposing and what was discussed for athletic fields, because there already are curfews, earlier curfews. So if we're going to go with 11 p.m. as the cutoff, athletic fields have a 10 p.m. cutoff by town policy. So Jocelyn here had suggested that we add to this list of exceptions in the first clause. So outdoor lighting not for egress, public safety, or mandated by code. Jocelyn is suggesting that we insert sports and athletic facilities, or whatever we end up calling those, that category, because that was another point of discussion, so that we avoid that conflict between the 10 p.m. and the 11 p.m.
Yeah, and I think I suggested this last night, but I'll just restate that sports and recreation areas, that term is the term from the referenced recommended practice document, and I think it's a better term than the ones we've been using. So I would just standardize to that. I think it's more comprehensive. There is, I mean, and we talked about this a little last night, I think recreation areas isn't narrowly defined, so could be interpreted broadly, but maybe that's not a bad thing. So, okay, continue, Elisa, I'm sorry.
David Trevette has his hand raised, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Well, there's a related item is G, and I had a suggestion for G. We'll get to that if we're going to keep on sports and like athletic fields.
David, I don't know if it might have just been me, but your audio was a little bit jumbled. Would you mind repeating what you just said?
Oh, sorry. Maybe I have an unstable internet connection. Can you hear me now?
It's better.
Okay, I may have to kill my
No, it's working now. It's working fine.
Oh, okay, good enough. I was simply saying that there are two spots in which we mentioned, for example, the sports athletic fields. So here's the curfew, but then also under G, and Jocelyn also had things there. And so I was just saying that if we're going to continue on sports fields, I had a comment to make on G.
Okay, yeah, that G will be coming up, I think, next. So so that was Jocelyn's first comment. Let's see. So going to scroll down. So here we are at G, sports and athletic field lighting, which we're going to say sports and recreation area lighting.
Just chiming in, that's not the language that's in the recreation manual, just FYI. I quoted it, I believe, in my comment.
You're
just
Jocelyn,
yeah.
You're talking about the Brookline's document?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Well, it's worth comparing them.
Sure. Yep. Agreed.
We're the language we have here now basically says that sports and recreation area lighting should conform to the IES and ANSI document, our recommended practice 6, sports and recreation area lighting. And Tim Davis or some member of DPW had raised the question about understanding what was covered and sort of suggested all kinds of different outdoor areas in town that might or might not be understood as to be covered. And my sense was by saying sports and recreation area lighting, that's a good coverage for essentially all of the public parks that are used for any kind of certainly active recreation, the ball fields, and then we did talk last night before you joined us about whether we needed to differentiate between active and passive recreation, because RP6, when you look at the detail, only provides guidelines for active recreation.
And there are 12 of those, 12 sports that are identified as activities that would be within our bylaw if adopted as RP6.
So David, does it make sense for me to explain my thinking before Elisa goes on to the next issue and before committee members comment?
Yes,
Okay.
sure.
Great. So my thinking was that currently there are 2 lit athletic fields in Brookline, as far as I can tell, Cypress Field and Brookline Avenue. Those are the only 2, and I speculate that and the lighting, those fields are closed at 10 o'clock. So there's no provision for lighting past 10 o'clock. The fields are closed and the lights are shut off at 10. I'm speculating that the reason for that is that there was, a public hearing process in the neighborhoods where those parks, where the lighting was installed. And there was some kind of a discussion with the public. I mean, that's exactly what happened at Dexter School. The ZBA had a hearing with the neighborhood and landed on a 10 o'clock closure with no added time for lighting. So it seemed to me that where this is a broad town-wide bylaw, that it shouldn't really either allow for additional lighting or encourage additional lighting where it is currently restricted.
Yeah, and a couple more things that were mentioned last night. Alexandra, gave us a fair amount of detail about practice, which on the one hand does conform to 10 o'clock, but not strictly. I mean, she just gave a whole bunch of different examples about, sort of including that they've adjusted practice when there's a cancellation to make sure that the lights aren't on when nobody's playing. So, it kind of goes both ways. We also thank you for pointing our attention to the published policy of the Parks and Rec Commission and Department that's posted on the website that says, as a policy, that, parks are closed at dusk except where there's lighting, and then it's 10 o'clock. So that's very clear. And then another thing that Alexandra helped us with is she said that those are the major fields, but there are other sports, tennis and pickleball and whatever. There are other lit smaller athletic courts, tennis, that have lights, not just the 2 big fields.
Oh, it would be interesting to have a list, to have an idea of where they are. I was unable to find any other lit facilities on the website, but that's relatively meaningless. So it'd be interesting to know where they are.
Yeah, so I'll shut up in a second, but I did think about what's the best way to maybe manage this. And so the suggestion that I'd like to just put on the table for discussion along with other suggestions, David Trevette said he had one, and I see Fran's hand is up also, is that we could simply, seeing the standing policy of Parks and Rec for 10 o'clock, we could enshrine that in our bylaw and say we have an 11 o'clock curfew except for fields where it's 10 o'clock. To me, a more elegant solution might be to only have our curfew as we've described it, which is as described, but to say very strongly in the curfew section that other more restrictive regulations and practices, policies and or regulations and policies that are in, that the town has put in place are controlling. So, but we don't dictate those. We don't fix those in our bylaw. And so we leave it with Parks and Rec Commission to to publish their policy, but we promote it, but we just don't put the specific hours and because that could change. I mean, it wouldn't change if we just laid down the law, then they wouldn't be able to change that to have exceptions, and we could do that. But my feeling is I'd rather defer to the, the committees that deal with this day in and day out, but others may feel differently. So let me go to David, and then Fran, I'll give you the floor, and then Pat.
All right. Thank you, David. Basically, I was, keying off of Jocelyn's comments today and trying to think of ways to, in a sense, coordinate what we're doing here with those other town policies. I actually am slightly, in a sense, in the other direction. I was inserting a line that says, unless otherwise allowed by that standard, that is NCRP 624, or by the policies of Brookline's Recreation Department or its park rules and regulations, such lighting shall be turned off at the conclusion of play or by 10 p.m., whichever comes first. So the end of that is what Jocelyn has put in. The former, I was trying to address concerns raised by Tim Davis about the kinds of exceptions that might occur in various situations. And so trying to say there are these other policies out there, here's what we want to happen. And I don't think there's any conflict. Troy and I are saying that these playing fields, which tend to have brighter lights, should be cut off earlier in conformance with existing town policy. I'm totally happy with that. Even if we decide on 11 p.m. for other stuff. So basically, I'll read it again, unless otherwise allowed by that standard or by the policies of Brookline's Recreation Department or its park rules and regulations, such lighting shall be turned off at the conclusion of play or by 10 p.m., whichever occurs first. So that was my suggestion.
Can you drop it into the chat, David?
Yep, sure can.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so the only thing is, I'm not sure whether, and Matt, you seem to be a little bit familiar with RP 6. I don't know if RP 6 discusses time windows. I think it only talks about the actual fixtures and how they're positioned and stuff. So might need to finesse, if we go with that wording, we might need to finesse it, because the RP 6 is more about the type of lighting rather than timing.
And just to remind everyone, except look at the notes from last night, between Alexandra and Will, they described 3 different currently operating situations with lighting. The first was, as you recall, Cypress Field. The lights are set to turn off at 10, but there are 2 30-minute extensions available to the users of the field. They can turn the timer and get another 30 minutes. The timer no longer functions after 11. Will talked about basketball courts and tennis courts that are inside public parks, and each one of those also has an extending 30-minute timer, but the time at which the timer stops working has been individually negotiated with each neighborhood in which that park exists. It's not comprehensive across the town. And then the third one was about the upcoming design for the Pierce School playground, which will have a sensor so that even if you were to extend it, once there's no movement, the lights turn off after 5 or 10 minutes, depending on what they send it to. But in all cases, it sounds like there are options for users to use a timer if the game's not done yet, or there's some other activity we talked about last night, cleaning up after the field is empty or whatever it is. So just be aware that the 10 o'clock is not when the power to the light stops working. There is still a user override for those who paid to rent the fields.
So that's inconsistent with policy and with the use policy, which is really interesting.
Yep.
I mean, it may be the case, but it's inconsistent with published policy.
Fran?
So, I guess I'm a little bit more stringent. I'm concerned that with the way the curfew stands, without making some exception, that people will use the 11 p.m. as a argument. This is the bylaw, it should supersede any regulation. The second thing that I worry about is regulations are really easy to change. And if we're trying to establish exterior, or you, I should say, not being part of the committee, are trying to establish regulations for exterior lights, then we should be willing to put the curfew times in the bylaw. Because otherwise, everyone knows you can make exceptions, they can change their mind. I mean, we've heard them talk about wanting to have the golf course lightings on until 11 o'clock, and why not? So if you want to make an effective law that actually controls nighttime light pollution, then I think that the idea of these sports and athletic fields enshrining the 10 p.m. Or when they end into law is the way to go, because otherwise it's not going to be 10 p.m. It's going to go to whenever they want. But that's just my cynical opinion. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Ariel?
I was thinking and about one other field that we haven't spoken about here, which is Northeastern University's Parsons Field. That's not a field that's owned by the town. And so I don't know if we're mixing apples and oranges if we include that in the discussion. But I wanted to mention that that field is located at Kent Street, sort of near the bottom of Kent. So just wanted to raise that as a question for us all to consider. Are we intending this exemption or this different rule for sports and recreation areas to differentiate, or only to apply to town-owned fields, or also to that university-owned field, which is a fairly substantial one? Second, hearing what different folks have said, my suggestion on the approach here is, I think a bylaw can trump regulation if that's what we want. We can also allow, if we want, to say, hey, there can be some area of regulatory deference. So for example, we could say, the town can make a regulation that would say you can vary the latest time that a sports and recreation area could have lighting anywhere between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. It can't set it earlier than 9 p.m. and it can't set it later than 11 p.m. if we're worried about too much deference. That would be one way to balance some of the things that we've been speaking about. If we take that approach, my suggestion would be 10 to 11 p.m. because I actually think going much earlier than 10 p.m. Would substantially limit people's ability to benefit from those sports facilities, and going much later than 11, I think, has a lot of bad effects that I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of. So, but I could see from other folks' perspectives maybe having a somewhat different range.
I just dropped the condition of Parson Field's lighting approvals into the chat. They have to be off by 9 p.m.
So maybe that suggests 9 to 11.
Yeah.
I mean, that field is surrounded by
Yeah.
residences, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, it is. And that's part of why I thought about it as, one that I think is important for us to think about.
So what's,
Yeah,
Yeah, Bill,
I-
Bill has his hand up and then
Oh,
I can't
yes,
raise my
please.
hand as a
Yeah.
co-host, so I'd like to go after Bill.
yeah, Bill and then Elisa.
okay, so picking back up on the first thing that Ariel just raised, I brought this up yesterday, asking whether the regulations apply to both private and public town-owned fields. And the decision was, yes, they do, but it's not, we don't need to say that because it's included just by the way it's written or something. I think it's probably worth considering making it more explicit. If what we're describing here does apply to both privately and publicly owned recreational areas, if questions like that persist even among people on our committee, we should put that in the bylaw to make it clear to everyone.
Could our bylaw undo that 9 o'clock limit on Parsons Field if we establish townwide a new limit of 10 o'clock?
No, I don't think so because if it's, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, your suggestion, but I would think if we said, if Parsons Field shuts off at 9, right? I think if someone else had a permit that said they could go to 11 and we implement this and say you have to be off by 10, then there would be a conflict. But if their cutoff time is earlier and we say that you could go up until 10, that's different. Like they have an agreement with the town on what the rules are. I would think that that would supersede this.
That's sort of what I'm asking. What trumps a planning board approval or a bylaw of the town of Brookline?
Maybe we just make that an express exception and we say, hey, look, if you have a permit that specifies an earlier time, then,
Right.
you have to have whatever that earlier time is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the suggestion the text that I had suggested was, putting in something that says that these are the rules, but if there are more restrictive conditions in place because of policy or regulation from another part of Brookline, another authority in Brookline, then those more restrictive requirements would apply. And I suppose that could also list, conditions of a zoning permit.
So, where would we capture? I don't want to lose, or maybe, Matt, you're capturing this in the notes. I don't want to lose Bill's comment about maybe making it explicit that this applies to all athletic fields. I mean, I think it's clear, but just, if, as you say, others, even among us, don't think it's clear, and we should make it clear, where do we put that? Is it here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's unnecessary and hence it's just more verbiage. And by being specific, it's almost like you then rule out other things. I mean, I don't know what you rule out if you've included both public and private. But if you don't say that, then it just manifestly applies to all, sports and what is it? Sports and recreation areas. We're regulating sports and recreation areas. And then where we come into exceptions, if we're going to give an exemption to the town of Brookline for something, we have to be very careful not to exempt them from it or to, we just have to be clear, but.
So, all right, so we'll have to work on that language. I, as Miss 10 o'clock, would like to come in and say that given that we know that the lights in these fields are going to be brighter than we are otherwise allowing for in the rest of town, I think that, and the town has a policy to go until 10, I think that it should be 10 o'clock. You can see that there are these individual neighborhood agreements with other, private fields that have a 10 o'clock cutoff because it is a nuisance to have that bright light on, a lot of bright light that late at night. So if we're going to put in a time frame, a curfew, I think I would advocate for 10 o'clock. And
They can read no later than 10 o'clock,
right.
right? And then
Yes.
there are ZBA or whatever conditions imposed that are
And-
earlier, obviously that would apply.
Yeah, and if we're worried about, potential confusion between, the 10 o'clock here and the 11 o'clock earlier, we could just go with 10 o'clock across the board. That's a joke.
Well,
I took it as a joke.
Yes,
Oh,
thank you.
I would be
Jocelyn,
in favor.
only because we discussed it at length last night is
Right,
is
yes.
what the joke is, yeah.
Yeah.
Just one-
We can continue on with, we can either try to, perfect this here. We could certainly gather more opinions from other members of the committee about, some of these toggles. For instance, we, just on a fundamental level, I was suggesting something more liberal, which is we have our standing 11 o'clock curfew, and then we allow, we acknowledge indirectly that, or directly or indirectly, but that the Parks and Recreation has, their own rules, and those are more restrictive. And in that case, the more restrictive applies. And I disagree. I mean, Fran may be right that people would, abuse that. But I think if we say that other restrictions apply, then it's not much of an argument that somebody says, yeah, but other, but it says 11 o'clock here. That may be human nature, though. I mean, that's Fran's point. So anyway, that's a more liberal point of view. We've heard, certainly Jocelyn and Elisa would prefer that we simply say that these that athletic facilities are, whether it's wildlife or people who want to go to sleep, there are impacts to those high, big, bright lights, and we should just turn them off at 10. And I think that this is the kind of thing where there's 9 of us, and we should try to find a majority opinion, and that's what we'll put down. We have a month before this even goes into the warrant, when it sort of gets cemented, and then it'll be debated for the following 2.5 months. So, nothing's final until town meeting votes.
If I can just sneak in one comment before Jane, the other thing that I would like to add here is that the lights, we heard Alexander last night talk about how some of the facilities, the light is either activated by motion sensor or you have to press a button, to turn the lights on. To require that the lights be off when the field is not in use. So you may be allowed to have the lights on as late as whatever curfew we set, but if you don't have a game happening, then those lights should be off. Does that sound reasonable?
It's fundamental to the, what do we call them? The second section that we,
Oh, yeah.
The principle.
the
Principles.
principles. That's one of the 5 core principles. I think it does bear repeating. Elegance suggests that we try not to, but principles are only principles. And so they aren't actually they don't lay down the law, the bylaw, right? So if we want to say that it's the law, we also have to repeat it somewhere else. I'm fine with that.
Excuse me, a quick technical question. Did Mike entering the chat actually get into the chat? It doesn't look like it did.
It did not.
It did not.
Oh, let me try this again.
All right, Jane, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm sorry that last night I was in my car and not as well versed and able to speak as I am now. I just want to comment. It's been very interesting to listen to this meeting, and I appreciate all the work that everyone's doing. And Matt, you really helped me to understand why on Park and Rec we get complaints after 10 p.m. Because I actually didn't understand what the issue was, but we do hear not only about lights but noise. And some of the things that are happening are basketball, which is obviously not a quiet bouncing of the ball, and we hear about the noise happening after 10 p.m. So it is interesting that we have our rules and regulation, and my perception as a Park and Rec member was that in fact everything was off by 10 p.m. where it exists. And now what I'm hearing and learning from this meeting is that's not necessarily true. I'm also embarrassed to say, as a Park and Rec commissioner, I really don't know where lights are on at other tennis and pickleball. And what's also interesting, to me, is the noises is as much of a factor. And we often hear, do not put this in our area because I don't want to hear a pickleball court all night long. So I just find it interesting. We seem to have some conflicting policies as they exist now. And that's interesting in itself. I do support the 10 p.m. time because it does seem like the thing that we hear from most neighborhoods, including Cypress, who really wanted to have lights on, is that there's neighborhood support when it happens, and when it doesn't happen, there's neighborhood opposition. So I do think it's important that the bylaw is strong as opposed to otherwise. So that's just one thought that I have on that, that I just wanted to share because I wasn't really able to articulate that as well last night. I think it's really important that there's clarity, and Matt from one group and myself from another group and this bylaw from another perspective do all need to line up and match and not be confusing. So that's just something I would also like to add. So just wanted to say those things. Thank you for letting me speak again tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Other comments? I mean, the other thing we can do is we can sort of continue moving through Jocelyn's comments. And then what I'd like to do as soon as we can is go back to the top of the document and try to, to refine a draft that we could have tonight a preliminary vote on so that we can just vote something out for continued external comment. And then we can talk about scheduling, but I'd like to meet again the week of the 10th to just refine that and integrate any changes that may have come up then, and also meet the week of August 31st to vote a final version that will be in the warrant, and that then starts to have limitations on how it can be changed after that. And I'm very grateful that the entire committee was able to attend both last night and tonight. And I think that everybody has to make their own decision, but I feel less concerned about having, I mean, we need a quorum, but for the follow-on meetings, I imagine that there will be less in play for the 2 additional meetings. So should we
David has his hand up and I have a follow-up.
Yeah, David, go ahead.
I was just going to make the comment that, and this is picking up on something that you said yesterday, sometimes when we're dealing with a thorny issue, we aren't exactly sure how to word it. I think it can help things if we can agree on our intent. And then we have to, keep working on the exact wording to implement that intent. But if we can agree on intent tonight on each of these thorny things, then we're ahead of the game.
Great. Matt?
And I just looked at the reservation form for Cypress Field. It says lights out at 10 o'clock. There's no mention. I also used AI to scrub Brookline's website. This idea that you can hit a timer after 10 o'clock, even if that is functionally a thing that can happen, it's not advertised. So I don't think we'd be taking anything away, including revenue, if we were to say 10 o'clock.
All right. Well, my proposal is that we move on to the next topic, but we'll have to return to this evening. Would people rather try to decide it now or move on?
I just have one more issue, if that's helpful to the decision making, but I think Elisa, you were going to present it.
Right. I mean, you did have a couple of editorial inserts.
They were mostly Scrivener.
Kind of, yeah, they didn't, they weren't, you're right, they weren't
Not substantial.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jocelyn's other comment is more substantive, related to adding a section for environmentally sensitive areas. So do you want to just kind
Yeah,
of...
Jocelyn, you want to read it to us and then you can present it?
Sure. Well, so I think it's very important to distinguish, garden variety property from environmentally sensitive property for obvious reasons, right? The purpose of this bylaw is not only to protect people from light pollution, but also to protect wildlife, and that's embedded in the purpose for this particular bylaw. Water resources are wildlife habitat, right? Wildlife needs water, and so those areas tend to be the most abundantly populated, I think, by wildlife. And what I heard last night, so originally I had listed a number of properties that I thought were essentially wildlife habitat, passive parks, I think, sanctuaries, and so forth. But when I tuned in last night at 9:30 or whatever time it was, Alexander was talking about how difficult it was to distinguish, to identify, for example, passive parks. I mean, I thought they were fairly well defined in the open space plan. But to address that, I went back and I looked at what I believe are the most environmentally sensitive areas, which are the wetlands and water resource areas. You know, in the north of Brookline, Halls Pond, and the woodland next to Halls Pond. In the south of Brookline, you know, a large majority of or a good portion of South Brookline property is either sanctuary. There were sanctuaries or wetland and water resource properties, and they're identified in a map that Brookline publishes. And those are the areas that I think are the most vulnerable to light, excessive light. You know, these are things that people don't ordinarily think of. Owls, for example, they fly within a mile. They'll fly a mile in order to hunt for food and then return to their nesting area. Deer forage, you know, after dusk and before dawn. You know, other creatures tend to be nocturnal because they're protected from predation by the lack of light. So by adding light to those areas, we are endangering those creatures, and we're not supporting the wildlife habitat purpose of both this bylaw and the conservation bylaw. And I also heard a comment that, you know, maybe this is something the Conservation Commission could take up, but frankly, there's nothing in the Wetlands Protection Act or the conservation bylaw that says anything about lighting. It's really about land, the land and the water, both above and below ground, that the Conservation Commission protects. So frankly, I think it's our obligation as a town to take steps to protect water resource area, wetlands and water resource areas where wildlife is most abundant and relies so significantly on darkness in order to protect themselves, in order to forage, in order to, you know, hunt. And so I added a section, which is entitled Environmentally Sensitive Areas, but rather than using the list that I had originally provided, I limited it to wetland or water resource properties and of the town of Brookline and adjoining of adjoining communities. And they can be very easily discerned on the town's map. So that's my pitch for including a section on environmentally sensitive areas.
Can I just add that amphibians too are particularly sensitive to artificial light at night?
Yeah.
There's documented, you know, papers that indicate that tadpoles don't mature when exposed to artificial light. We know that turtles are especially sensitive to artificial light when they're reproducing. So it really seems to have, for some reason, disrupts the reproductive cycle of amphibians in particular. And of course, amphibians tend to love water. So that's another reason to pay particular attention to wetland areas.
Justin, can I ask a clarifying question? In the way this
Sure.
is written, if there is, let's say just a diurnal pool, something that fills with water after a storm and then slowly drains out, which is a type of wetland. If one of those exists on a property, the entire property is subject to this, or just the area of the wetland?
I believe it should be the entire property. And the reason for that, and by the way, I think there are 3 identified vernal pools on the wetland map, town's wetland map, all of which are in South Brookline. But as I said, you know, an owl will fly a mile in order to hunt for food, and they won't hunt for food when a property is lit up. So I believe that that it should apply to the entire property. I mean, the properties we're talking about are largely the Horror Sanctuary, the Lost Pond Conservation Area, and a good portion of, well, the entire Putterham Golf Course.
So as an example of something I have firsthand knowledge of, the former Pine Manor Collar, which is now Boston College, the wetland buffer for that, because I worked on the project, extends into their parking area. So therefore, would that entire campus, because it's one property, not be able to have lights?
No, because if you read the first sentence, it says, except for fully shielded lighting on principal or accessory buildings or designated parking areas, which shall be the minimum output necessary for public safety. Outdoor lighting shall not be permitted on any town of Brookline property that is identified as the location or source of wetlands or water resources in the map, or on
Okay.
any town of Brookline property abutting the wetland or water resource properties of adjoining communities. That really refers to Hall's Pond, I think.
Okay, so
So it
where
would
it's not
not-
a Brookline property, not an issue,
Correct.
and also where it's lighting their parking, not an issue.
Correct.
Okay.
I wonder about, Jane had, I think, mentioned Griggs Park, which is, a wetland. There's a perpetually wet, there's almost a, whatever, there's a marsh in the middle of it with willows, but it's an urban park surrounded by apartment buildings and houses, with walks and play structures and stuff. And I don't know what lighting, if any, exists in that park, but that would also be dark, right?
I've got a,
Well, again, fully shielded lighting on buildings or in parking areas. I don't think Griggs Park, I honestly don't know, but I don't believe Griggs Park is identified in the wetland map.
What would this mean for
Maybe it should
looking at
be.
the golf course?
The golf course is, I think you heard last night, is in large part wetlands. There are certainly intermittent streams that flow through it. And it's at the apex of what I consider to be a significant environmental area. It's at the apex of Lost Pond, the Horse Sanctuary, and itself is wetlands. I've forgotten how many acres it is, but it is certainly a wildlife. It's being promoted as a wildlife habitat.
But it also falls in our category of sports and recreation areas because golf courses and driving ranges are two listed activities in RP6.
None of which are currently lighted.
Right, but we're saying that you could still have a driving range and a golf course, you just couldn't light it.
Yes.
Michael,
yeah, I've got a clarifying question too. We're talking about wetlands here. Are there other areas that are not wetlands that are still environmentally issues within the town?
I think there are, Michael. Thank you for raising that. I really changed my language based on what I heard Alexandra say. I'm all in favor of returning to some of the original language, but I had listed passive parks, sanctuaries, and wetland and water resource areas, and I forgot there may have been one other category. I think Dane Park is both a passive park and it's also it hosts a wetland. So yes, I think there could be other areas that should have the same protection. But I just want to be, in deference to staff, I revised my language.
I would at least put the wildlife sanctuaries back in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
or do we, I mean, I don't think. I mean, the way this is framed is very broad in terms of the properties that it outlaws lighting. And I don't know that we need to then also list them, because essentially every one of our sanctuary properties has water in it. And so it would inherently then fall under this of, you can have fully shielded parking lot lighting, but that's it. If there's
I thought it would be simplest to just simply refer to the wetland map, which in my view is relatively clear.
Right. No, I think that the radical distinction here is between the wetlands and the properties that contain a wetland. Because if you look at the wetland map, and we can put it up and share it, there's not a lot of water in Brookline. I mean, compared with the larger
Right.
Charles River watershed, like 2/3 of of Lincoln is wetlands, right? I mean, it's a very low-lying town. We aren't. We have the Muddy River. We have a few isolated ponds, reservoir, relatively little amount of wetlands. So regulating wetlands would be one thing, but regulating every property means that 121 acres of Putterham Meadows is just is dark, and that's
Well, if you look, yeah, if there are intermittent streams, David, running through out a good portion of it. And as I said, it's at the apex of this really significant sanctuary area.
No, I'm just clarifying the distinction between. So this is the question that Alexandra was asking last night. Is that she was basically saying this the language needs to be clarified. I think we are clarifying it now. But she was saying, is the suggestion regulating wetlands and wetland buffers? Because if that's what's being proposed, then that needs to be made clear. What's being proposed, that is not what's being proposed. What's being
Right,
proposed
yeah,
is any property with a wetland on it, or with,
right.
yeah. So that's what we should discuss.
And the reason I'm proposing that again is because, for example, the buffer is, I think, under the Brookline bylaws, 150 feet versus the state, which is 100 feet from a riverbank or, whatever. And, creatures of the night don't distinguish between, 150-foot buffer zone, when they're looking for prey or they're reproducing or whatever, all of the activities that wildlife needs to do to flourish. So I believe very strongly that it should apply to the entire property.
So Jane had her hand up and then put it down. And given that she's a commissioner, I was wondering if her comment was around the areas we're talking about.
It actually is around the areas. I was on the Griggs Park design review, and so I do appreciate that maybe it's not officially listed as a wetland, but the entire conversation was about protecting the wetland. So it's interesting that our maps, I guess I'm learning a lot. Our maps don't even always match what the reality is, which is just interesting in itself. I would say the interesting thing about South Brookline is most of it is wetland. Anything near the golf course has, pretty much a wetland piece to it. Let's put it that way. Last week I was on a conservation commission call about a home on Hammond Street. I happen to live on Hammond Street, so I do want to put that out there. And I think they thought I was going to be objecting, but this poor person has gotten floods every single year because of a wetland that's actually in Sewell Park, which is, I do not think necessarily on that map that as I'm looking at it, but Sewell definitely butts a wetland. So it's pretty safe to say most of South Brookline seems to have a wetland component to it. And so I just want to say that. I just think I guess I go back to that original comment. I think I understand what Alexandra's trying to say, being clear about it, but there are places that have wetlands that are not necessarily identified as such. And we do want to make sure we're clear on that, I think, as this bylaw goes along. So I just wanted to say, add that to the discussion. But the golf course very specifically is identified in the open space plan as having wetlands. And in Justin's most recent newsletter, he talked about the third hole, which is actually behind the driving range, actually opening up to a waterway, a water thing. So that was some of the work that they did, which then even makes it more of a concern because it is a wetland area. And the idea of how much the habitat is increased in that area. And the other piece of that being is that, part of their goal of the Friends of Putterham golf course and the other piece of the whole master plan was to actually, and it's in their plan, is to increase the habitat and conservation and green space so that it's open to the whole community. So that is, it's an interesting goal. It also lights at night, but then also kind of go against. So I really do think clarity is going to be super important. And that's really just kind of what I'd add that comment, but I do agree with what's been said. So thank you.
Can I speak after Fran? I'm raising my hand.
Sure, Fran, you want to add a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to be quick. I am on the board of the Friends of Halls Pond, and I was also a member of the Amory Playground Design Review Committee. And I wanted to point out that Jocelyn's idea of the whole property and nearby is quite relevant because Halls Pond is actually the little sanctuary bit. Amory Woods is not part of Halls Pond Sanctuary. And right outside the fence is Amory Playground. And one of the things that people wanted us to have in Amory Playground is to take all of the blacktop paths and have them lit overnight so that they could bicycle through as a cutoff from Beacon Street. So, you know, limiting it just to Halls Pond is a little bit surrounded by a huge park and a woods. So you might consider the idea of extension. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, Elisa?
Yeah, so, we are in the middle of the 6th mass extinction, and one of the primary drivers of the accelerated extinction of life forms other than humans and cockroaches is habitat loss. And when we light up everything around us, we are, we might not be removing the physical piece of land, but we are effectively making it unsuitable habitat for other life forms. So I would be wholly in favor of trying to protect those limited resources that we do have. And, there might be a trade-off where maybe, people can't do everything that they want to do, but there's a whole lot that people still can do. So, maybe we can make room for life forms other than people in this process.
On the properties at Amory, I'm pretty confident that this proposal would prohibit lighting on Amory Playground. I think the playground is probably within the protective buffer of Halls Pond. Halls Pond sits right there at the edge of the playfield.
The tennis courts are lit.
And the tennis courts are lit, so this would require we don't have to do this, but it would essentially mean that those tennis court lights were non-compliant, would be pre-existing non-conforming with our bylaw. We would not, the way this is, the tennis courts are not on a separate property. The playground would be impacted by this, and so the tennis courts would be impacted by this. So again, to David Trivette's point, I think what I would most like the committee to do is to try to reach a consensus about our intent. We don't have to craft the language, but to have a discussion about, I think, the concerns, and I think we all acknowledge the threats to the environment and to wildlife and the desirability of protecting wildlife areas. I do know that I've heard from other people in town who basically, talk about a balance, and that this is in the city, and that most of Massachusetts is woods, and there's plenty of room for the owls. I'm not making this case. I'm just saying we have to get this through town meeting. So it's on us to figure out, both what we would most like to see and what we feel confident that we can convince town meeting to pass.
Well, one possibility, David, would be to grandfather the existing. I wasn't aware there were lighted tennis courts at Amory. But certainly consideration could be given to grandfathering existing, improving the lighting and, making it, the best possible lighting and then sticking to the curfew for existing lighting, but certainly not allowing additional lighting.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that it's, there's an active and much broader debate about the driving range lighting. And that's a debate that hasn't really, it started and stopped, and it would restart, but this would be essentially preempting that debate. And we'd be basically saying nobody needs to have a debate about that because other than at town meeting this fall, and which also does, for better or worse, make potentially a lot of this bylaw a referendum on the driving range lighting, which I'm not sure is a good thing for this bylaw.
My notes
Well,
are,
I push back a little bit on that because, the driving range lighting came up a year ago and there was, I think, one Park and Recreation Commission meeting, if I'm not mistaken, but there was very, very limited public process. And so there was a conversation with staff and recreation about, making sure that the lighting or whatever lighting was proposed was essentially dark sky compliant and ensuring that there was community engagement. That was over a year ago. And consulting with Audubon to be certain that we weren't destroying habitat, as Elisa has pointed out, and that hasn't happened. So, I'm not terribly sympathetic, and I don't think you can have it both. It's a wetland. It's essentially a wetland. It was a peat nursery at one point, and you can't have both an environmentally sensitive area and a lit golf course. I just don't think they're compatible.
No, I understand, but what I've heard, and I may not have heard correctly, but what I've heard is that the Parks Department or the Recreation Department has an intention to develop a dark sky compliant plan and bring it forward. They acknowledge that they got out over their skis in the past, but I haven't heard. It's my impression that this is still something that is on the table. And all my point was simply that this would take it off the table, given a vote for this at town meeting.
Mhm.
Ariel and Julie.
My suggestion is this does seem to be very targeted at the golf course in particular, just given some of the comments here. I think there have been attempts to make substantial changes to the golf course before. Those are challenging. I'm not sure that that's a challenge that we want to take on as part of this effort. So my suggestion is that we don't.
Julie?
So just really briefly in response to that, right now, I believe the steady state at the golf courses, there are not lights for the driving range. Is that right?
Yeah.
There's no currently,
No, there's
right?
no lights.
So we wouldn't actually be changing anything at the golf course. But I also feel like I saw something on here that basically said light sky, that dark sky wouldn't certify did I see this athletic lighting near a wetland? So I don't know if there is a way for them to be dark sky compliant. So
There
trying
are
to
different
remember.
zones. Julie, there are different zones. Dark sky will not certify lighting zone 0, LZ0. You can make a pitch that it should be LZ1 or LZ0. But regardless, this really isn't about the golf course. It's about a wetland that should be protected, in my view. So I think it's highly appropriate for this bylaw to address wetlands, not specifically the golf course, of course, but wetlands.
Right, but your proposal reaches far beyond wetlands. It reaches to a mile that an owl can fly from wetlands. And that's I think that's the push, right?
Well, because there's no current regulation. The conservation, the Wetland Protection Act and the conservation bylaw don't address lighting.
No,
And
no,
of
but
course-
if, for instance, if you were proposing that the restrictions on the table applied to lands that were regulated under wetland protection, meaning wetlands and wetland buffers and riverways and riverway buffers, that would be a much smaller amount of land that you were proposing that we protect. And it would be a lot easier to bring that suggestion to town meeting than what you're suggesting.
Well, I would push back on that because, as I said, if you look at the map, there are intermittent streams throughout the golf course. I mean, so where do you define where that starts and where that ends? It's the entire property that is a wetland resource area and a wildlife. It's the golf course is currently being promoted as wildlife habitat, and one of the goals in the open space, Parks and Open Space plan is to improve the golf course for wildlife habitat. So, again, I don't think you can have both. You can't have a protected wetland and a lit up golf course. It's just, they're inconsistent.
Right, but I think the driving range is on high ground. And you could make the case that until 10 o'clock, and in the summer, that's only an hour past dusk, that you could have lights on that limited piece of 121 acres of land that was acquired for the town for a broad spectrum of uses, which would certainly include wildlife habitat. It wasn't bought as a golf course or donated as a golf course. Anyway, what I'm saying is that there are specific boundaries that are already in law that are easily staked, that are wetland and wetland impacted, protected buffers. And to propose lighting restrictions on those defined areas would be a lesser ask of town meeting. That's all I was saying.
I asked ChatGPT to estimate what percent of Brookline is within 1 mile of wetlands. And it said between 65 and 75%, with a best estimate of about 70%. So if we're going to use this as our, where we want to have a different standard, we're essentially making a rule for almost all of Brookline. That's.
No, I'm not suggesting it should be a mile. I used the mile example because I learned yesterday that barn owls travel a mile to hunt for food. And so my point is, an area that's excessively lighted is going to interfere with that, with that hunting, with that creature's hunting. So the point here is to protect, I think it's the point of bylaws to protect wildlife, right? And wildlife is very abundant in wetland resource areas, and our wetland resource areas are very well defined in a map. And
right. So Jocelyn, I think what you're saying is that a barn owl, or an owl rather, sorry, can hunt within a 1 mile range of wetlands. So we need to have our lighting regulation treat all areas that are within 1 mile of a wetland.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm suggesting we should offer the greatest protection that's reasonable and possible and reasonable. And frankly, I think that is the property itself that is host to the wetlands.
I mean,
To
what
me, it's
practically speaking, I think what the proposal is to essentially grandfather any lights that are in large town passive recreation areas, all town large town passive recreation areas, but to not allow any new lights in any town properties. Effectively, it's the Lost Pond Reservation, it's Horse Sanctuary, it's the golf course, it's Griggs Road, Amory Playground, Muddy River. I mean, it's essentially every single large passive, uh, uh, wooded area and space that the town, probably that the town owns. And that they should just not have night lighting. I mean, and, if that was what we decided that we agreed with this proposal, we could potentially figure out, or at some point it could be figured out that, perimeter pathway lighting was allowed, and, whatever it took to do this in a way that put um, wildlife protection and that dark park protection first, and was also, I mean, and we're not, the parks are closed at dusk, right? So in large part, this isn't a practical issue anyway. Um, David Trevette, Julie, and then we'll hear from Jane, and then I think we should sort of decide, either come to consensus, or say we've had a good discussion of this, and then just go back to the beginning of the document and try to work our way through, and then maybe our heads will be clearer when we get back to it, and we'll be able to say, well, again, what I'd like to do is put something on paper, make some kind of a decision on paper today, whether we craft the language or not, like get the intent down, and ideally be able to vote it tonight. And again, it's not a binding vote. It's just, I think a vote is important. We've been at this for 7 months. It'd be nice to take a first vote if we can. So, yeah, David Trevette, Julie, Jane Flanagan, Ariel.
Okay, thanks. I had several different comments. I mean, it's not clear to me what this would do to change the golf course unless they may be hosting evening events. I don't know that. I'm not at the golf course very often. With regard to, I think, based on this discussion, we are generally in favor of adding some kind of protection along the lines that Jocelyn has suggested, but we are trying to figure out the language. I wondered if and I have to confess, I've been confused back and forth. Whether we were talking about town-owned properties, as in, parks and sanctuaries, or we were talking about any property within the town of Brookline. And so I think that the language right now, when we refer to a town of Brookline property, that doesn't say a town of Brookline owned property, that could be interpreted as, and I thought that, like when Ariel did his question about what close to wetlands, that means all properties, whether private or public. So I think we need to be clarified what exactly we're talking about. And also within Jocelyn's suggested wording, if we say any property that is identified as the location of wetlands, and get rid of source or water resources, that may be confined. We're trying to keep this thing from being too overwhelming to make it easier to pass town meeting. That might be, so bringing in the wording like that might help. So there's my comments right now.
Julie?
I just had a really brief comment about the possibility of grandfathering existing lighting, and I would just, not to clutter this up further, but just I think we should specify that when that lighting is renewed or fixed or whatever, that it should be, as close to compliance with dark sky as possible. That's all.
Right, but in the case of the tennis court lighting at Amory, it unless we were very deliberate to say that it would have to be replaced with dark sky lighting, the bylaw would require it to be removed.
Well,
As
except we were
proposed.
talking about grandfathering it, right? So I'm just saying at some point they need to repair or replace that lighting. If we want to grandfather it, then I think, we should just specify when it's complete that the lighting should be consistent with dark sky. I mean, at least consistent with dark sky principles. There's actually some, I think it was Jocelyn at some point shared some pretty outstanding lighting of athletic facilities that was dark sky compliant. And I realize the location, they might not be able to get certification or what have you, but they still can they still can adjust the lights appropriately. So that's all.
Thank you. Jane?
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to kind of pick up with the David Pollock. I think you said very well what I was going to try to say, and then David picked up on it a little bit. I do think, again, I'm going to go back to being clear about what we mean by wetlands, and I think if we be really clear about that, it really does actually address many of the concerns. Going back to, I wanted to say, when I saw Tim's idea of some of the ideas he was thinking about for nighttime lighting, one of those was sledding. Which actually at Amory Park, people talk about that being a beautiful area to sled, but I wasn't sure if that then meant to put lights there. I don't know where else that might mean nighttime sledding. In other areas, it could mean cross-country skiing, I would assume would be the golf course, which would then also impact nighttime in the winter. So it wouldn't just be a seasonal thing. And I do want to say that all holes, except for maybe the 12th hole, have water. So there is water throughout the golf course. So that is a real issue, but it is already identified as having a wetland. So I think that by being clear that it has that wetland and whatever, and going back to something Jocelyn said about the approval process was supposed to include a Mass Department Environmental Protection study, approval, a Mass Audubon study, because it is like Amory, a migratory bird path, and important for that reason. It was supposed to include neighborhood input, in meetings to discuss the lighting and what people thought about the lighting. And it was also supposed to be dark sky compliant, which, as I understood it, they were not able to meet that standard. So that being said, it didn't seem to meet any of the things. It is now back. And I just want to say, in a preliminary CIP, lighting at the golf course is in there. So I just want to say, being clear and giving clear guidance to us as Park and Rec commissioners, quite frankly, would be really helpful. I really wouldn't be upset by that. And I do think it would be nice if we could really make it simple in the language so that it's understandable to town meeting. This is an important bylaw you've done a lot of work on, and I would like to see it passed. And I do think it needs to be simple and move forward in that direction. So I appreciate your comments in that way. Thank you.
Pat?
Yes, just to be brief, my dilemma coming from public health, I feel like this is such an important warrant article to pass, and I really want it to pass, but I'm very sensitive to overreach, just having come from public health overreach and having things kind of go backwards because of it. But I think it's really important. One of our purposes is for wildlife protection. And that's stated right up front. And I really support this idea of having some language about environmentally sensitive areas. And I think we can clarify it enough. And I like the grandfathering idea a lot with replacement with dark sky lighting once what we have now is no longer of use. So I hope I'm supporting this language of environmentally sensitive areas.
Matt?
Just it's not on my notes, but last night I believe Bill from Parks and Rec mentioned that there's a project to install pedestrian lighting along the pathways at Lars Anderson. Does anyone else remember hearing that? It's apparently in the master plan. I'm looking at the Koppler, what is the name of the company?
I know they're doing something with the walkways there. I didn't know it included.
Koppler Martin Design Group's master plan includes lighting, and we know there's a wetland because they're talking about restoring it to make it larger. So we already have town funds allocated for a lighting project in one of these types of open spaces. I assume they go off at a certain hour, but I also assume it's to promote the use of that for passive recreation into the evening, particularly in warmer months where people might want to go for a walk in the park, but it feels unsafe for humans. So that balance, yes, wildlife, but if you've got walking paths and there's an advantage to having them used by humans at other times, like what is the right balance to strike there?
If I could, I'm sorry,
Yes.
if I could just intervene, Matt, I'm a member, I'm the vice chair of the Friends of Lars Anderson Park.
Yeah.
That's the first I've ever heard of that proposal. It's highly surprising to me. I'm completely unaware of it, and it's something certainly that I would oppose. So I'll certainly be looking more into that. I don't think the neighborhood has had an opportunity to weigh in on that. But thanks for bringing it to my attention. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
I may have misheard that. That's what I thought he was saying. And I'm looking like, where is
You-
that coming from? So I found a source, whether it's accurate or not.
I just want to pipe in that you did hear that correctly, and that was actually mentioned in a very similar, very brief way at a Park and Rec meeting, which was met with a lot of confusion and a little bit of shock because there's been no design review for that. The Friends of Los Anderson Park have not been involved in that, and the neighborhood has not been involved in that. And so it was actually given a little bit of pause at that particular meeting. I imagine, and it was not mentioned in the CIP, the preliminary CIP. So I don't know where it's at this particular point, but again, I think it was met with more shock and opposition than it was favorability.
Great.
Thank you.
Ariel?
Sorry. So I'm not as familiar with the definition of wetlands under Massachusetts law, but I did want to mention under federal law, and if it's similar under Massachusetts law, this is why I'm mentioning it. The way that waters of the United States is defined, it includes transient bodies of water, which would effectively mean the entirety of Brookline. So that, you know, again, I'm not as familiar with how it's defined in Massachusetts law. So I want us to be cautious. I think we should probably not bite off more than we can chew. I think there's a substantial risk. I think we should try to fix whatever rules we want to fix for the town as we're going through this. I don't think it makes sense, given the potential broad definitions of wetlands, to have a separate rule for wetlands than we have for the rest of the town, because the rule for wetlands might be the rule for the whole town.
But Ariel, I just want to point out that there's a specific reference to the town of Brookline's wetlands map, which does not identify, it identifies very specific areas and certainly not the entire town or a good part of the town.
Well, so is it, well, I think it depends on what we put in the bylaw then. Are we saying we're going to have a different rule for areas that are wetlands or for areas that are identified as wetlands in that particular map? Because I think those are two different things, if I'm understanding you correctly, Jocelyn.
So the current language, which may change, refers to property that is identified as the location or source, someone suggested taking out source of wetlands or water resources in the town of Brookline's wetland and water resources map. Which is, I think I sent the committee members a copy of the map, but it's very specific in terms of what.
I had it up earlier.
Yeah, we were looking at it. And so as proposed by Jocelyn, it's actually, well, it's properties that are identified on that map. Jocelyn, was your intent to include both public and private ownership? Or when you said town of Brookline properties, did you mean all town of Brookline properties? Or per the earlier question, did you mean owned by the town of Brookline?
I intended it to refer to town of Brookline owned property.
Okay,
But yes.
I mean, David Trevette was saying that when he read it ambiguously, that a town of Brookline properties could mean any town of Brookline property, any property within the boundaries of the town of Brookline.
And in fact, when our committee visited Dane Park, what we were being shown was light from private properties entering Dane Park and interfering with wildlife.
Right.
Okay, so again, I referenced the map, which is specific to, it actually does identify private property. I haven't thought much about it. I was intending for it to mean town of Brookline property, because that's certainly what we can control, right? Easily, without
But
revisions to.
I think what David's referring to, though, would be regulated under other portions of this, like the shielding and the color temperature and all of that. So.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think I put language in, I think I included language, except for fully shielded lighting. On principal or accessory buildings or designated parking areas, which shall be the minimum output, etc.
Right, but
Outdoor lighting on any town of Brookline. I intended for that to mean owned property. But
yeah,
it doesn't mean to say it shouldn't be broader than that.
Just to add,
right, but it outlaws, landscape lighting and recreational use lighting, and basically anything. It says, you can have a light on your building, so you can get in and out, and you can have light on your parking lot. So the buildings are carved out, but the land is dark. Any property that has has any problem, I mean, potentially we could simplify it for the moment and say any blue that impacts a property boundary impacts the entire property, and that property is limited to parking lot lighting and lighting on the building. Is the way I read the proposal. I mean, whether it's town of Brookline owned or everybody owned is open to discussion, right? So do we want to wrap this and understanding that we have to come back to it in not very many minutes and actually make a decision? But do you want to go, should we start at the top and see if we can kind of try to go through the red ink and affirm what's in the bylaw? I mean, we're due to have a read through of the whole thing and just have the committee say, we're good with this, every paragraph, right?
yeah, just before we go away from it, if we didn't choose the map, another source is to I'm finding these things as we're looking. There is a published document, the Inventory of Lands of Conservation and Recreation Interest, which is in the Brookline Open Space and Recreation Plan. That lists by name town-owned properties. We don't have to say anything about, you have to look at a map to figure out if there's a body of water and then the whole property. It would just name the properties that the town owns that would be subject to the bylaw by reference to this document, if that made sense. If they ever acquire another piece of open space, it would be added to the inventory. The inventory would likely be updated, and by reference in our bylaw, that would also be part of the list. So I can put the link in the chat.
Yeah, can you just repeat the name of that document? Matt?
It's called Section 5 of the plan, Inventory of Lands of Conservation and Recreation Interest.
Is it a long list?
It's the last page of the thing I just put in the, was it the last page? Not the last page. The last page of the first section. Hold on a second. It is, but it's inclusive.
Right.
Historic parks, community parks, neighborhood parks, passive parks, school playgrounds, nature sanctuaries, public cemeteries, the golf course. It actually includes traffic median, circles, triangles, and other small open spaces.
Right.
Oh,
But-
so
but-
I had originally referenced that plan. But because it had such a broad list in response to what Alexandra said last night, I limited it to the wetland map.
I see your logic now. I'm reading how many things are on this. You can't not light a traffic island because it's going to be part of a roadway. So
Right.
I withdraw my suggestion.
Okay. All right. So from the top?
Yeah, so first item is this suggested added sentence from town council. Any comment? Have you guys thought about this, and are you comfortable with it?
Yes.
I guess I'm trying to understand the intent, sorry, of that sentence. And is it just to point out, just to point people towards zoning? I'm just
It's-
not.
Yeah, and Joe was with us all last night, but he didn't speak up much. He was
Mhm.
also he was simultaneously at the select board.
Right.
So the town council was quite adamant in his concern about warrant article 8 last fall, that because it specifically set out to regulate glare and trespass under a general bylaw, that was illegal, and that it wouldn't stand up to the judges in land court, and he could not support it. And he does support the bylaw. He's reviewed what we have here, and he doesn't have those concerns about what we have here, because this bylaw is doing a lot of very different things than specifically regulating glare and trespass. And a lot of this environmental stuff is to the point, right? Human health, etc. So he presented this suggestion just last week, and I think I don't really want to speak for him, but I believe it's to sort of underpin his previous concern that this is something different. And so he's basically saying, see, it is something different. It is, the regulation of light trespass and glare is in zoning, and it's still in zoning, and it's not here. So just any legal challenge to this, the town could point to this sentence and say, how can you say that we're regulating trespass and glare when it says right up front, those are regulated in zoning? So I think
Yeah.
it's belt and suspenders kind of.
Understood. Yeah, no, I think what maybe bugs me about it is we're stating a purpose and then we immediately state what is not the purpose. So I guess I feel like I would maybe just put it down further after we've stated all of the purposes, but that
We can
maybe
do
it's
that.
just me, but it just bothers
I,
me.
mean,
I agree with that. I totally agree, because it reads better.
I'm okay with that.
Thanks.
Yeah, and that, yeah, are those things all E's and F's? Is that?
Yeah.
I'm just like, I'm getting rid of this. Of the E, yep. Okay.
Yeah, it's not, doesn't get, okay, great. Everybody happy?
Yep.
David Titel, welcome, and welcome to Advisory Committee, which isn't meeting tonight.
Which is
did you have
not
a
meeting
comment?
tonight. Yes, I realize that I'm coming in at the 11th hour here, and so the intention here is not to throw a bomb into the pool, but that phrase really concerns me. And the reason it concerns me is because it immediately puts a spotlight on all the arguments we had and all the confusion that happened the last time we went through this, which is I read this and it's unclear to me as a naive reader what the distinction is between a bylaw, a zoning bylaw, and what we're doing here, given that a lot of the stuff we're talking about is the same. And I think that it is we could easily fall into the trap of having to explain why this isn't a zoning bylaw rather than explaining the utility and the importance of this warrant article itself. And I don't know how to get out of that knot, but to be honest, it's not clear to me how this isn't zoning as I read it. I hear what you're saying, it's got other pieces to it, but it still has pieces that regulate shielded lighting, that talk about retroactive stuff, that talk about future building, that talk about specific colors and specific temperatures. All of that was in the previous one. So I don't understand and I was unfortunately unable to attend yesterday. I don't understand why council thinks this is fine and the other one wasn't. And I don't understand how, as a town meeting member, I would be able to see why this isn't zoning and why it wouldn't be potentially go down in flames if somebody were to sue, which was the whole argument last time. So again, I'm not trying to make waves, but I think this is a potential downfall, and I don't want to lose all this hard work over this point.
Can I add something on to Dave's comment? It's almost like by making this statement, you're calling attention to the past controversy.
Precisely.
But we're
Precise.
in it by moving the section on glare and trespass out of signs and into its own section. So it no longer is subordinate to the signage header, which was the problem that it didn't apply. Now it would apply. We have two warrant articles. One amends the language in zoning, and then this new one adds a general bylaw, and they work in concert. So if you file a nuisance complaint under the general bylaw, which is backward looking, the enforcement officer, who is the building commissioner or designee, if it is around glare or trespass, has the ability to point to the definition in zoning within the context of saying you can't have light that does that. It has trespass, it has glare. What are those? Well, they're here. You find the definition here, but it's also part of the bylaws, so the definition applies across. We're fixing that major issue in terms of the bad edit that was done years ago to the zoning bylaw where lighting got rolled up under signage.
So
One possibility, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so I understand that. I guess that I think what's being called into question is, why do we need to highlight that here?
And
That's,
what I was going to suggest that if Joe is insistent, maybe we can sort of moderate this a little bit. We've already moved it to the end, and rather than talk about the purpose, even though this is in a purpose setting, it can be simply a note. Note that light, trespass, and glare are separately regulated in the town zoning regulations, in town zoning bylaws. It can just be a simple statement. Not talking about what we're trying to do or what we're not trying to do, but just note this other thing is over there.
One suggestion I have is that we, rather than take this out now, that we gather these concerns into a written memo. I mean, just send me these notes. I'll send them all to town council. We can get a written response from him, and hopefully he'll be in town and we can have him attend our next meeting and we can discuss it with him.
Ryan,
Yeah,
was his
That
original
was my
comment?
response was the same as Elisa's. I was like, why do we have to draw attention to this? But I also, sort of, we want to work with him. Yeah, Matt and then Bill.
We had definitions initially, right? Was he reacting to the fact that we were defining glare and trespass? And he said, we don't need to do that. They're already defined.
No, we have not mentioned those in this bylaw.
No,
We
didn't we have it in an earlier draft?
No, at least not recently, because I think never, because it was always like, no, we're that's warrant article 8 from the fall. We've kept it out. Bill?
yeah, I wasn't clear. The footnote in this said it's a suggestion from town council, not that he was adamant about it, right? I'm not sure which
Yeah,
one
no,
it
that's
is.
correct.
But
He was
I
like,
think I
yeah.
agree with what David Trevette said, which is a little different than what's being typed right now. The idea of a note that these things are handled somewhere else. So I think that to me was the right way to thread this needle, and could be enough to move along, acknowledging town council's input, but I think it's not as sharp as the earlier version. I
And
thought
not
David
saying not
Trevette's
what
idea
we,
was very good.
yeah, and I was going to leave out that this does not regulate, just as note that glare and trespass are regulated in Brookline zoning bylaw. Pure and simple.
Yeah, I don't know if it should say note that. Doesn't sound like legalese, but it could simply say
Whatever.
light trespass and glare are, and perhaps separately, but light trespass and glare are regulated under Brookline zoning bylaw.
Yeah, fine, get rid of the note that.
a Brookline zoning bylaw?
Well, we can refer to specifically where that's supposed to be, right? Where it's going to go. Once
It is not a zoning bylaw. The bylaw is singular and it includes everything within the covers. You remember we just had a town meeting just passed an amendment that changed the spelling of bylaw, right?
Yeah,
We just
and we can,
voted that.
and isn't it bylaws plural?
No,
No.
it's
Okay.
not plural and it has a hyphen. for
Oh,
better
okay.
or worse. Okay, should we move on? Okay, do we want to add this guiding principles? It's sort of like extra. We don't necessarily need it, but it seemed to me, Elisa sent it out for us to look at, and I looked at it and I was like, well, that's very concise. Why don't we put that in? People agree?
Help sell it to town meeting.
Yeah. I
Everyone
like
can
it.
understand those.
Great.
Yeah.
With all due reference to, due respect to dark skies, I disagree with one of them. I disagree. Okay, decorative Christmas decorations, holiday lights are not needed, but they are beneficial. And so I would suggest where it is needed or beneficial. I mean, I think we're eliminating too many things.
Do you mean useful, David?
Need is a funny word. Hmm?
Do you mean useful? I don't see.
We already have used.
Light should only
Oh, where
should
it
be
is needed.
directed
Okay.
only where it is needed. And I'm saying needed or beneficial, needed and or beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined not to edit this sort of canonical list that came from Dark Sky, but we could. I also think that between useful and needed, people can say their holiday lighting is. I mean, we don't have to. I don't know that we have to debate holiday lighting. We've exempted it.
No,
Is
I
it a
agree
holiday
with
spirit of need?
I agree with David Trevette that it would be handy to have this because there is also lights for safety purposes. And I think what we're doing here is we're saying these are the guiding principles, and those are going to be used for the purpose of interpreting when it's unclear what the bylaw means. So if what we do is we say light should be directed only where it is needed, we're going to have a much narrower scope when there are questions around how the bylaw would be construed than if we say where it's needed or useful. And at least in my mind, or means and or.
What was you said, Ariel? You said useful, but David Trevette used a different word. What was your word?
You said
He used
beneficial.
beneficial.
Oh, I see.
He used beneficial. I use useful because that's what I use in my law practice for these kinds of things. But yeah, we could use beneficial if you all prefer.
I defer to
Okay.
the lawyers.
Do we like this?
I'm fine with the edit. I mean, the controlled lighting as, you know, sort of also references it being useful.
Dark skies includes the statement, lights can bring cheer to the festive holiday season, creating a sense of warmth and wonder, connected to traditions and joyful family memories. That sounds like a need. It's in the subtext. It's not in the bullets, but I think it's there.
Or a benefit.
I mean, to put beneficial definitely broadens it and softens it. I what let's come to let's finish the edit and move on. What do we want to do?
Well, why don't we go with Ariel's suggestion, because, you know, as with his attorney hat on, he's telling us that useful is, you know, sort of equivalent to beneficial.
Is
I
that
mean-
not redundant with bullet A, useful?
And then useful shows up in D as well.
Yeah. Redundant.
Well, but this is talking about the targeted is directed, right? Where it's needed or useful. And then the controlled is that it's only used when it's useful.
Correct.
I gotcha. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Let's
I'm
move
okay
on.
with it.
Nobody, I don't think town meeting is going to get into this. This one will go below the radar. Okay, let me just comment about our definitions. It's a relatively short list, but it also can be amended in the future. You know, because I don't think we ever actually use lumen in the bylaw. We could even drop that. But I also think that definitions these are pretty straightforward definitions. I did change the entire bylaw to just use the word fixture instead of luminaire, to make sure everybody understands. Luminaire is used throughout the dark sky documents. It's very, in the dark sky world, it's just luminaire everywhere. But both the House and Senate bills that are current now, it's the budget, the whatever it's called, the environmental bill, environmental resources bill, or whatever it is, just uses they both use a definition of fixture. And so I just thought fixture's a lot friendlier and more understandable, and they're really synonyms. So also may be referred to as luminaire is a construct that town council asked for as a way to make sure that it wasn't doing something bad where we have two names. So it's still a fixture, okay? So I think we should move on. I don't know that we need to delete luminaire, lumen, it's fine. I
So-
shortened it a while ago.
So leave it?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think it's fine. I mean,
Yes.
unless somebody wants to, get rid of it.
The footnotes were really just to collect comments, right? Should we seek to remove those now from the draft? as we go
If
through?
we get my thought was not to spend the committee's time on that.
Yep.
And that, I think if with your consent, I'll work with Elisa to erase all of the footnotes except where we read one and say, hey, we kind of haven't quite resolved that, or it's important to have that there when. So quick side note, the date that was for our next meeting that was most popular was Pat, what can't be here, but everybody else who responded could make it on the 11th. The 11th also happens to be when this is going to be on the agenda for Parks and Rec Commission. They meet at 6 o'clock. I have asked the chair and Tim if perhaps they could take us up at 6 o'clock, and either a few of us could attend Parks and Rec at 6, and then we could have our meeting at 7, or we could post the moderators committee at both 6 in a joint session with them, but post it so we could have a quorum, and then at 7, and people who were available could come at 6, listen and participate in the discussion with Parks and Rec, and then we could have our own meeting. But I guess my point was, if there are footnotes that seem like they're informative to the Parks and Rec commissioners, then we might decide to sort of leave some, but we'll try to streamline it so it's as few words as possible. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And
I
there
don't,
may be some of the comments that people submitted to us that are useful when we're writing the explanations, because we will have to come up with the explanations.
And we have those all memorialized. I mean, we're not erasing them from memory. We're just
Yeah.
erasing them from what we vote.
Yeah.
did we talk about Ira's comment?
We did not. That's why I'm lining it up so that we talk about it and I'll note what we decide here. So I think Ira was
Does-
asking if we should add a definition for bug rating.
Yeah, I think no. I think we learned in the fall that it just makes people crazy to have all these complicated engineering stuff, and we don't reference it. So why would we put in a definition?
Well, then I would ask, then we don't reference lumen either, so why would we leave lumen in?
Okay, we can take lumen out. What do people think?
Do we reference light pollution?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in the purpose.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Do we talk about yeah, I guess we do.
Yeah, I think taking lumen out makes sense.
Yep.
Just to be consistent about what we're.
Was Ira the person who also provided a diagram which we had looked at before that identifies what a full cutoff fixture does? I think we decided we don't want diagrams, right? We just want words.
I don't miss them. There's these Xeroxed pages that a lot of towns have adopted that show good fixtures and bad fixtures, but I don't think that they'll necessarily age well, that diagram page.
Yep.
I mean, we might end up including it in our explanation, just to illustrate, you know, kind of what we're getting at. I don't know.
Yeah, we could. That's right.
And I'm
All
just
right.
gonna make I want to make just a passing comment that just a reminder of how interconnected different parts of this document are. So originally I objected to the 5 feet above grade at the property line. Once we had exempted porch lights, which you took care of the second and third story porch lights that I was concerned about, I was okay with this. You get rid of one, then suddenly there's an objection to the other. So I'm just reminding us to think about the interconnectedness.
What I want to remind us about the 5 feet at the property line is the following. I think that all of us, because of our walk around North Brookline, where there were a lot of full cutoff fixtures that still were, you know, where you were looking right into the filament because it was 12 feet up or whatever on a wall. And we said, and we also saw a fixture that was maybe a full cutoff, but it was just shining all this light on a fence across the driveway and into the neighbor's yard and everything. And we said, okay, this is a way to essentially deal with trespass by saying that this is our definition of a fully shielded fixture. However, it's very rare in other bylaws. And just common parlance, and if somebody goes to Home Depot to buy a fully shielded fixture, this is just nowhere to be seen. So we are kind of out there, right? By doing this, where it's a pretty significant additional constraint that we're putting into the bylaw that's unusual across Massachusetts and essentially in the industry. The industry doesn't define a fully shielded fixture this way. That having been said, there is a fair amount of nuance when you get into looking at fixtures of between, you know, a standard fully shielded fixture is a 90-degree cutoff fixture, meaning it doesn't shed any light above 90 degrees. But there's definitely fixtures that have 80 and 70 degree cutoffs. And then there's commonly with higher end fixtures, there's photometric diagrams that show at every degree how much, you know, like there's a lot of information out there. So I'm not speaking against this. I'm just reminding us that this is fairly restrictive.
And just responding to your point, a key word in this is install. It may not say anything when you buy it, but this talks about install, which gets back to the point you made about our Center Street walk.
Yeah. So do we like it? Should we leave it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's
All right.
look.
Just one more thing, just to remind you that the next definition of a directional fully shielded or whatever for tree lights and building lights, it's up a little.
I just wanted to look at Ira's comment because we had
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, the comments related to the fully shielded. So you had one that you just explained, but Ira had expressed concern about the term fully shielded. And he said, you know, he's saying that not everyone agrees what this means. He was suggesting that we use bug ratings instead, but I think we already had that discussion and decided we're not going to go in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what led him to produce the diagram. Let me just go scroll down to his diagram. Let me see if I can make this bigger. Hold on.
The key thing here, and then in terms of our definition and explanation, we're not changing scope, which is one thing we can't increase scope once it's in. We can certainly modify definitions to make things clearer.
It would be easy to remove, the moderator would approve removing the 5 feet at the property line, but would not approve adding it later.
Right. Okay, let's go
Okay.
back. Okay.
All right. And I just also wanted to remind us that that we have a definition of a directional shielded fixture, a directional fixture that's specific for when you're lighting a building or something that has louvers and baffles. It's a minor point. Again, that's not something that's in very many bylaws.
Sorry, just to go back. We're using fully shielded. We're specifically not using full cutoff, correct? They mean different things, which is, I think, the point of that diagram. The difference between fully shielded and full cutoff.
What's the difference?
Full cutoff allows 0 intensity at or above 90 degrees and no more than 10% intensity at 80 degrees, where fully shielded means no light emitted above the horizontal.
Huh.
I think fully shielded is probably what we want to start with.
Yeah. But then we would love it if we would love it if the lighting stores only sold full cutoff.
Yeah.
Everybody comfortable with that? Not pushing it to the next level? Okay. Nuisance, we had some push about our definition of nuisance and whether it, but I think I didn't hear anybody on the committee unhappy with what we're doing, right?
Right.
Sky glow, we have a definition for and we don't use it ever, but I don't know that we want to take it out.
Yeah, it's used in one place
Okay, great. All right.
up above.
So new, I think Jennifer had said, and it's not clear when compliance is reviewed.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Jennifer's comments, I think many of them were indicated to me, and I didn't have a follow-up conversation with her. She's also a new member of the advisory committee. But I think she was reading it as a zoning bylaw.
Yeah.
That's what it seemed like. And then Tim's comment we already went over yesterday, about the timeline, but I think we do need to discuss the timeline because, well, for a number of reasons. So
I
here's,
have,
here's the
yeah, I
timeline.
have suggestions for when we get to item 3.
Okay, so we're good with number 2. That one, thank you, Elisa, for pushing this. Let's make it clear that changing light bulbs, and then we added per the discussions about switch fixtures with a little color temperature switch. So it says be remedied by changing a lamp, adjusting the brightness with an integrated switching function, etc. Need to be done, those simple things within a year. So
that item 3 brings us head to head with the question of town exemption.
Right.
And so here's where I think we need a discussion about intent. So we've had a lot of pushback from DPW and other parts of the town about unfunded mandates. And so in my trying to think about this today, it seemed to me that it could be beneficial for us to find some kind of compromise. So I had a chance conversation with a former AC member this afternoon where he agreed. It doesn't seem fair to require property owners to do something and totally exempt the town. And I don't think we want to totally exempt the town, but on the other hand, budgets are real. So my suggestion is that all future town installations be compliant. And in a sense, we waive the bringing existing things into compliance, or rather say something should be brought into compliance as budgets permit. So I have some wording for that, but so my suggestion was to modify item 3 to exempt, to take out all other nonconformities that except for those basically owned, operated, maintained, managed by the town, and then introduce a new item 4 and renumber the existing 4 and 5 to 5 and 6. So basically the question now is, does anybody else agree with that proposal for the intent? We can then talk about how to implement it.
So I'm wondering if your comment isn't a little early in that we maybe should address it when we get to town exemptions. And we should first just read 3 broadly as what we want the bylaw to cover. And I also, as a side comment, I don't think it's a great idea to continually talk about unfunded mandates on the town, because it's an unfunded mandate on every taxpayer as well. I mean, it's kind of the same for everybody. And again, as I said last night, town meeting at least has control over the budget and can decide what it wants to spend money on. So if it passes a law, then it can fund it. I think that to sort of Fran's point last night when she said that Fran said most of the outdoor lighting we're talking about is municipal lighting. I disagreed with that because I don't think we'd been talking about it. But I think her point that most of the capital plant, the money that's been spent on outdoor lighting, is the town's money because of all the street lights, and it owns the most lights, and so the fiscal impact on the town is the biggest, and so we should be concerned with it. But I think we should just first, maybe just review these 3 sub bullets and see if we're happy with them. So the first one corresponds to what would be a level 3 alteration under the building code, which is the highest level of alteration before new construction. And the building code regulates level 3 alterations. And this is the commercial building code, not the 1 and 2 family, which is a whole other discussion. Which I was having anyway yesterday about the history of the 1 and 2 family code. And as exclusion, essentially a form of exclusionary zoning, right? But be that as it may, major projects, need to comply. That's what this says. And I think I'm comfortable with that. We had a lot of pushback on change of ownership, both because it's very hard to track and also because, somebody's buying a property and now all of a sudden they have a huge additional expense when they weren't planning on renovating. And I'm comfortable with just removing this, but we need to discuss that. And then Tim Davis's question about where he's got 4 light poles around a field, and if one of them breaks, now all of a sudden the 25% triggers and makes him replace the whole thing. So I think we have to kind of figure that out, but I would suggest that we first try to figure it out for all owners before we say, well, the town should get a different rule, because maybe it's too restrictive on all owners.
Can we just back up?
Yeah.
Which is the 5 years? Like, so, I mean, are we assuming that the 5 years is the right time frame? I mean, I think we have to review all of this. Right?
Yeah, well, right. And I think it's one of the, my sense of this bylaw is that we're doing a lot of heavy lifting by some of the things that we're not even talking about anymore, which is just saying everybody has to buy shielded fixtures, and you got to, we're trying to lower color temperature, and we're actually going to be moving the town significantly. And I don't think the 5-year thing is that big a deal. So if somebody said it really should be 7 and we'll have a much better chance of getting it through town meeting if we ease it out some, I don't know that I care that much about it. I don't know, Lisa, you may have wanted to change it to 3. I mean, what do we think? Like what?
No.
And Michael, I know you had your hand raised. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, I think I would change the nonconformist to 10 years, including the town and everything else. 10 years gives you plenty of time to put it in your budget. That's number 1. And I'll also leave the one of any property that changes ownership. I'd leave that in.
Yeah, so let's, the pushback that we got on that was, that, that this isn't something that's tracked. So,
But it is tracked. I mean, the town knows about changes in ownership. It's the building commissioner who said he didn't know, but then another part of the town can inform him.
Don't we
Yeah,
have, don't
it's
we have,
complaint driven anyway. So the building commissioner gets a complaint that the new owners have put up new lights or, something, or that and then he's got to figure out, he calls the assessor.
don't we have a certificate of occupancy? If you bought a house or
No, certificate of occupancies are issued in zoning, if you will, on the other side with building permits, but they go away and I mean, yes, it's in some kind of historical record, but no, nobody, it's not like the Board of Health where you have to, in your kitchen, you have to post the piece of paper that says that you're allowed to operate. There's no such thing in other buildings.
David, I would second your suggestion to delete that change of ownership. I do think whether we do 1 year, 5 years, 1 year, or any other arbitrary period, I think it should apply uniformly. And I don't think we should try to have different rules for if there's a change in ownership, if it's owned by town, if it's this or if it's that. With the only one potential exception of large capital expenditures, like large stadium lighting kind of installations where I think we should consider useful life of that fixture installation where because of the cost of replacing not just one light but one whole system of lights is going to be substantial, whether it's for the town or otherwise.
I'm thinking about the commercial properties changing hands. Just as an example, what if Wegmans bought Stop and Shop? Upon the acquisition of that property, would they be compelled to replace all the lights because the property changed hands? Same function, different owner. Is that what we want to have happen? Or would the property have 5 years or 10 years anyway, and regardless of when Wegmans bought it, whatever's left on that duration is still left, but the clock started ticking as soon as our bylaw was adopted?
I'd go for option 2.
which is, Michael, just because
I'm sorry. That was, as I understand it, you've, to me again, it'd be 10 years or give plenty of time.
Yep.
But whatever is left remaining on that, that's what there is. Now you're talking something like Wegmans or something like that taking over a major property. They can build that into the budget.
Yep.
If you're talking, well, no, I don't mean to be dismissive of a larger business, but I would build it in. I would have the remaining time that's left on the from the bylaw, from when the bylaw started and the clock is ticking.
So that's the trigger, right? We don't necessarily need a secondary trigger.
Right.
Of a change of ownership, right?
And I think the reasoning for it is if we're okay with the light not changing until the end of that 5-year period or whatever year period, then we should be okay with that being the case regardless of who owns that property.
So
one thing that's intriguing about Michael's suggestion of extending it to 10 years is that we might be able to then come back to parks, to the public works and say, okay, we've doubled the time, we're giving you 10 years instead of an exemption. And then it also gives them 10 years to appeal to town meeting for an exemption on a particular lighting system that they don't want to replace. Like if it was at 8 years or 3 years or whatever, I mean, whatever the number is, but if it was coming up on it and it was going to cost $1 million to replace the lights at a field, and they held a neighborhood meeting and the neighbors said it's not that much glare, but it technically was they could come to town meeting and say, we'd like relief from the bylaw. They can always do that.
And then in the first year, we'd have everybody changing their bulbs, right? Because that 1 year, major impact right away. Everything's warmer. And then for the other stuff, the horizon is the horizon.
Except for all of those god awful like wall packs that may not have a switch where you can adjust the color of the light on them. Like think of the lights that we saw on in that building that's behind the Center Street parking lot where the farmers market takes place. Remember those super
Right,
bright-
but those were like spotlights that were shining out. Those were like,
right,
yeah.
but if you look at like how this would come, like how so I those may not have a switching function where they could dim them. They're you know, change the color temperature. And so now you're talking about those lights being okay for you know, another 10 years. Like you're talking about that very interesting house that we saw in South Brookline being okay for another 10 years.
Well, I think you can make a nuisance complaint on that one. But
So, that was my question was, does are we thinking that the deadline exempts everybody, even if there's a nuisance complaint or, okay.
no, the language clearly doesn't do that. I mean, we'll get to it, but we do have a statement that says this doesn't, if it's a nuisance, it still needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like 10 years is a really long time. Like it begs the question of why we're bothering with some of this. You know, I'm not unsympathetic to the town in terms of age of systems, but I just I think we need, you know, if we care about this, then we want to see some movement sooner than in a decade. So
Well, let's keep talking about it, but I mean, we can always extend after it's in the warrant. We could change 5 years to 8 years or 7 years or 8 years or 10 years. The moderator would allow that because it's less restrictive.
To pick up on what David Trevette said, isn't there a section later on where we exempt streetlights and we talked about potentially exempting additional municipal lights?
Yes, that's right. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
So but that affects us, right? We give them 10 years, doesn't affect the stuff that's exempted.
Right. Right.
Although what I was saying is if we gave them 10 years, maybe we don't give them an exemption.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
We just say 10 years is long enough.
Can I make a suggestion here that, you know, because the 25% seemed to be an issue, like, let's say for the skating rink, right? Where there's only 2 poles, so one goes out, you have to, or there's 4 poles, so one goes out, you have to replace the whole system. Maybe can we make this consistent and just make it 50%? So at that point, it seems reasonable that if you're already having to replace 50% of your lighting system, just go ahead and do the whole thing.
I mean, I'm okay with that. I think it's pretty liberal, but it does address the concern. And the thing about little I1 is that it's sort of what's odd about little I1 is that it's using the building renovation as a trigger, but we're really only regulating outdoor lighting. And so most of the time it's little I3 that's going to be the one that, or 2 now, that's what the important one is, what's happening with outdoor lighting. But little I1 does say that if somebody does a gut renovation of a house, like a developer does a flip on an existing building where they don't tear it down, so it's not new construction. This says, okay, but they need to do compliant outdoor lighting. So it's good. They're both, but they're different.
So you
One
need to
is about
change
the building, the other is about the lighting system.
Yeah, you need to change the 25 words to 50.
Oh, yes, thank you. So, I mean, if we agree with this, does this seem like a reasonable change?
Yes, I agree with it too. I mean, I think that the example we've been giving actually doesn't apply here, right? Because if it's 1 out of 4, then it's not more than 25%. But I think that
True.
the general idea is still that this is worth doing, I think.
So should we
Then,
say?
Julie,
50%
to your
or-
point,
Yeah,
to your
50%
point,
or
number
more.
4, of, number 4, actually, it's a 60-day for a nuisance.
Yep, great. There it is, yeah.
Okay, so what was 17?
Okay, let's look at 5 first. It says I know you want to, okay, go ahead and do footnote 17. Will this conflict with town meeting's dissatisfaction over lack of practical way to measure glare? Well, we're not regulating glare, so maybe we're clear of that.
Okay.
Okay, in case of conflict between any of the provisions of this bylaw or any other town of Brookline bylaw or regulation, the more restrictive provision shall apply. So in a certain way, that bakes in the 10 p.m. curfew at parks. We've already covered it here, right? If we want it to be hyper efficient.
And I have a suggestion along the lines of something that Aaron Shute said. Instead of talking about other oh, wait a minute, never mind. This is a comment for a later section. Sorry.
We can read Aaron's comment here.
No, this is no, I remembered this one is, I think is fine as it stands. There's a later one where I would suggest a modification.
Right. I mean, we talked about this last night. And this is sort of the conflict between this bylaw intentionally being compact, and whereas Aaron's preference seems to lie in enumerating every possible, situation. So
Yeah, I think we're comfortable with the fact that
Yeah,
we basically said if it's a state or a federal light that we're not messing with it, that it's clear. And she was like,
Oh.
well, can you make that clearer? I think we don't need to.
Well, that's a separate thing, but this one is fine because this is just two different town of Brookline things competing with each other. We'll get to the other and then I have a comment on that.
Right, right. No, but I think this, the point I just made, like what's nice about this is it actually makes way for the Parks and Rec restriction on the earlier curfew. We can
Yeah.
still put it in our bylaw, but we don't, strictly speaking, we don't necessarily need to. We may want to both to have our own bylaw to make it our law, and also to make sure that there's no confusion.
right, but what Erin is saying here, rereading her comment, is she's saying that it should not state that the most restrictive applicable lighting requirement automatically governs in every circumstance. I mean, of course it does. Like, if both,
But excuse me, but this one only talks about between Brookline, and she's bringing in all sorts of non-Brookline stuff,
exactly, right.
which is treated later.
Yes, exactly. Right, exactly. Right. Thank you. Okay. All right, so moving on to requirements. So this was just a general comment by Jennifer that she thought this needed some more work. Ira talking about a category for nature preserves could be useful. We already talked about that. So I think we're addressing Ira's concern separately.
So just on B, I had swapped out activity and put in the word use because I think it addressed a lot of comments. So to fill the outdoor use for which they are intended, it's a better term. And then Matt had asked if we could put in the sentence lighting levels consistent with IES RPs for the applicable use type shall be deemed compliant. That's just an addition that the committee has not ever had an opportunity to comment on.
Your get out of jail free card. Yeah.
But this just relates to light output as opposed to, doesn't have anything to do with the color temperature or the nature of the fixture. It's really just how much light the fixture is emitting. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, the IES establishes what amount of light is necessary for each outdoor act or each activity. So that's, well, how do you know what's necessary? Well, IES defines it. So by reference, we don't have to.
Yeah. Could we add at the start of the sentence, in all events, comma, lighting levels consistent with the standard or the RP shall be deemed compliant. And that's because I don't think that we should limit ourselves to just what the IES says, especially if they change their requirements.
Yep.
So you're saying in all events, lighting levels consistent. Can you repeat what you just said, Ariel, please?
It's exactly that. You know, in all events, lighting levels, and then everything else would just stay the same.
Okay.
And what does that change?
So what the intent of that change is to say that this is not limiting. We could actually have something that is that differs from what the IES recommended practice says, but what the IES standard says will be deemed compliant, even if other things may also be deemed compliant.
Okay. Okay. So now we're into a more complicated one because it ties down to, ties to the town stuff and to recreation, sports and recreation areas. And we did not have a conclusive, part of our conversation. So does anybody want to pick up on it? There are those who didn't participate much in that conversation who've reflected on it, who want to weigh in?
I want to hear Michael's comments on this.
Well, here again, I think in a commercial area, my comments had to do with the surrounding businesses being open or providing a warm, beneficial environment. And I thought midnight was fine for that, and personally compromised with 11 o'clock. I think in areas like the wetlands that we're talking about, personally, my personal taste is to shut it down at dusk. We don't have any lighting there except in the parking lots. Here's different. So anyway, that was a commercial comment. What we've been discussing on the sports and recreational areas, I think has been fine. As a practical matter, in the sports and recreational areas, they're 10 o'clock. And it provides for some game going over on the rare occasion that it does. It's not all the time. I think this reads fine, just like it is, just now.
Others?
Did want to clarify one thing, even though our zoning code allows signs to be kept on 11 o'clock or after, all of the decisions in the past year, the second condition or the last condition's always been lighting shall be controlled by a rheostat and limited to operating hours. So when the business is closed, the sign turns off. That's not the lighting inside the store, that's just the sign. But I didn't realize that in practice we weren't actually following the zoning.
Yeah, that's fine, but my business, I have one sign that's certainly grandfathered in. It's been there 50 years, I think. All right, and I have it set. I think the shut off time is at midnight or 1 in the morning. I certainly wouldn't have any problem setting that earlier. But my business doesn't close just because, the doors are shut and all the inside lighting is open. There are window lights. Now there are spotlights forcing down, and the neon sign in the window, which isn't a big glaring sign, but that stays on to say who we are, and it provides here you are, you're open and you're around and you're alive. Boston didn't necessarily shut down at 8 o'clock in the evening. Or in our case, we close at 7. So we're supposed to completely shut down at that point. I don't think if the signs are in compliance, you know, I don't think it's a big ask to leave them on for at 11 o'clock. I don't think that's a problem, or any window lights that aren't glaring into traffic or shining in someone's eyes, but having a spillage over onto the sidewalk of a couple of feet. I don't think it's a big thing. And I don't think it inhibits any of the wildlife that we're talking about or anything else.
Yeah.
I-
I should, let
Oh,
let
I
me
was
just
just
say
gonna
that,
say, I don't think it's the intent of this bylaw to limit, to regulate sign lighting at all.
Right.
And it doesn't say that explicitly.
No, but that was where the 11 o'clock originally came from.
I understand it was parallel,
Yeah.
but signs and sign lighting are clearly regulated under zoning, because there's lots of language about that. And I think my understanding was that we weren't touching that this doesn't apply to signage lighting, which also for the First Amendment considerations, and because it's regulated under zoning, there's like lots of reasons that this isn't regulating lighting of signage.
Right. No argument there. The question is, in a commercial district that might have active use until 11 p.m. and a wetland area or a recreational field where we're trying to turn it off at 10 p.m., do we want to have two different times in
Well,
Brookline?
I was asking a different question. Maybe I was diverting us unnecessarily, but do we think that we somehow need to say that we're not regulating lighting of signs the same way?
Yes, and so I'm thinking, yes, exactly, same way that we're saying that we're not regulating glare.
But it would be, but then we can maybe move. I don't know, we don't want town council's sentence to be under exemptions or exceptions, because we don't want to do that.
Right.
But it is kind of very parallel. And so does it go next to wherever we put town council's sentence?
Yeah, so we put town council's sentence here. I think we could just add signs. Light
Oh.
trespass, glare, and signs are
And signage and illumination of signs.
Fine,
yeah,
it's fine.
I like that.
yeah.
Okay, now on to this question of, are we gonna have a separate curfew for sports and recreation areas? I'm getting the sense that a majority of the committee wants that, to have a 10 o'clock curfew and just put that in. Is anybody, straw poll or something? I mean, is that what we want to do? And then if that's what we want to do, is the best way to do it essentially, following on Jocelyn's suggestion, where we put this new red sentence phrase in, and then either immediately after we say sports and recreation areas shall have a curfew of 10. And maybe it could just stay there and not put it down lower under sports and recreation areas, or it could go lower. Maybe it doesn't matter, right? But it might be better to just have it in curfew.
Hmm.
I mean, it could also be a little I in curfew. It could be an indent, and then you could say, then we could add it. And then little one, little I, little one is that it doesn't apply to solar powered accent lights. Little one could become a 10 p.m. curfew for sports and recreation areas, and then little two could become solar powered, ground lights.
So the only thing is, like, there's other stuff around the curfew for, that it would almost seem to, I think it would read more easily if we started out by listing the curfew for sports and recreation areas and then having everything else follow. Right, because this is more an exemption.
Or qualification. a cross-reference, basically, if we make it a 2 under there.
It could be a separate, it could be instead of, it could be a new, yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, again, we're wordsmithing. We could just say for now that, it'd be nice to get it straightened, but if we want to simply say, outdoor lighting for sports and recreation areas, shall be extinguished, by 10 PM at the latest, and as otherwise restricted by town policy, regulation, or agreement.
Okay, hold on. It shall be extinguished by 10 PM at the latest. And what, this isn't me typing slowly, it's my system choking on everything that's open.
Yeah.
At the latest, what was the rest of that?
Oh, oh,
Then
By
it's,
the later, by the earlier of 10 PM or, you know, or as required by permit.
yeah, sure, by the earlier of 10 PM. Or,
As required by permit.
as required by, town, regulation, policy.
I think
Or,
permit is what we mean, right? I mean, because we're talking about some exceptions were negotiated as part of their permits, right? Really?
but it's also if the town negotiate with the neighborhood to have the racquetball court or the pickleball court lights turn off at 9, a neighbor can't say,
Right.
you said we get to keep them on until 10 because there's
But is that a permit? I don't know that it's.
that one's a
technically
policy.
Yeah.
Parsons is a permit. Something else would be a policy.
Well, then maybe we need to see them.
So,
A town permit or, yeah.
and then take it out of here.
Yep.
Then do we need to say all other, otherwise outdoor lighting not for things shall be extinguished for,
All other outdoor lighting.
all other outdoor lighting. Yep.
And I think in the previous phrase, move town, required by town permit or policy. Just move it in front of permit.
And I would say, I would say town permit, comma, policy or regulation. Unless Ariel says that's. No, that's good.
Makes sense to me. Although I defer to Jocelyn if the town calls what it issues something other than regulation. I don't
I
actually
think they're
know.
different. I mean, sometimes there's policies like the Parks and
Sure.
Rec is not a regulation, it's a policy, but other times it might be could be regulation.
Yeah, I don't know what the town calls the thing, the non-law
We definitely
promulgations.
have regulations because I wrote some. I know that
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
in sidewalk stuff.
Agreed.
All right. Let's.
Okay, so I think we've addressed all of everything except for, you know, DPW's keen interest in being exempted from just about all of this. So,
Okay, this is Jocelyn's, unless otherwise provided in this bylaw.
oh, no, that was me. That was me
Yes.
to try to address,
Playing field, yeah.
right, that sports facilities are gonna have higher than, they're gonna have a higher CCT out of necessity. So yesterday, though, we had a discussion about, is it 2,700, is it 3,000? I know I would go for 2,700, but I think most of the rest of you were thinking a range. You know, like, you know, shall not exceed 3,000 with 2,700 preferred, like, you know, we had a discussion about that.
Comments?
If you do that, you can remove that last part of the sentence, right? Shall not exceed 3,000.
Right. So, is Dave Titel still on
Yep.
here? Dave, do you have any thoughts on 2,700 versus 3,000?
I have thoughts on all of it.
Speak up.
So I think a lot of people aren't going to necessarily realize the small difference between 2,700 and 3,000 when they're buying a bulb in the store. And they're just going to try to get a yellow bulb, right? And some are a little warmer than others and a little cooler than others, and they're not going to realize it. And I think we're asking a lot of people. I think 300 degrees Kelvin is not too much to give here. So I would say 3,000 is fine. There's a lot of other stuff we've been talking about that's far more restrictive. What I worry about is I worry about really creating creating ill will by being too, when somebody's, let me try again in English. Somebody's trying to do the right thing and they buy a bulb and they buy a 3,000 bulb instead of a 2,700 bulb, and suddenly they get yelled at. And their intent is good. So I want to try to make sure that we don't have too many things in here where people are trying to be good actors and they still get burned. And this feels like one of those places.
So do we want to say after K with a preference for
Yes.
2,700 K?
Yes.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
with 2,700 preferred. I mean, I don't think we need more, or whatever.
Just from a wording perspective, will it come up whose preference? Is there a better word than preference? With a recommendation of? I guess that's the same
Oh,
problem.
okay. Well,
What's less
How about if we
a
say
lightning
with,
rod?
how about if we say with the deployer to reasonably consider 2,700K if possible?
Yeah, or encouraged.
2700K encouraged. Yeah.
yeah,
'Cause
just the
there's-
word encourage. I like
Yeah.
that. Pure and simple.
Okay. Let's see, so that, I think that resolves Jennifer Rate's concern about about being strict. Tim Davis talked, okay, that gets to sports lighting. Oh, Ira had brought up the issue, and I think maybe you, Matt, had mentioned this last night about bulbs that have adjustable CCT.
Mhm.
So do we need to reflect that here?
It's
No,
a little weedsy,
No,
but
because we're saying emitted, so you could have one that goes up higher and just you have to have it set for to lower.
right.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
A lot of commercial lighting now is tunable, meaning you can change the color temperature after it's installed. So you can tune it to the environment based on what you're trying to sell.
right,
But I don't see a lot of that for exterior lighting yet.
right. And okay, so we've addressed Aaron's concerns and okay, and then this was Maria's comment about, did we get to directional lighting
Yeah,
or the
we just went by it. It's kind of wordsmithing. She wants it somehow to, she's suggesting slightly different wording.
Please stay there for a moment.
where?
Well, okay, right there, right there. Oh, so there's something, it may be a definitional problem, So we've inserted this curfew shall not apply to solar powered accent lights that otherwise apply with the provision of this bylaw. First of all, that implies shield, and a lot of these things, these little pathway accent lights that we see are not always fully shielded. Secondly, we have a separate line elsewhere about string lights. And that is sort of funny the way it's worded right now. And some of these solar powered things have common features, like they eventually go off by themselves and may not even have on off switches. So I want to bring these two things together somehow and find reasonable wording. I mean, I just put up our cafe lights this weekend. So for the first time this summer, I was late getting to it. And they do go off by themselves. And they're very low. We can't, it's not enough light for us to eat dinner by, which we do anyway.
Are you suggesting a edit?
I'm suggesting that we are, so when we say otherwise comply, I think that means that a lot of the things that we said we want to allow in our walk around are not allowed. Those little pathway lights. I think this is saying they're not allowed.
Wait, doesn't it say that it says they are allowed, right? That's
Well,
what
no,
this,
you know what, I think it is if you,
It says they must otherwise comply
oh,
with that otherwise comply. And if they're not fully shielded, then they don't otherwise comply. And most of them, I suspect, I don't know this, but I suspect are not fully shielded.
yeah. I mean, I don't know that anybody's going to complain about them from a practical standpoint. Also, the ones that I have, because if you look at my street or drive down my street or walk down my street, it's got reasonable street lights except for the 100 feet in front of my house, which is dark as black. For whatever reason, there's no street light. And so we have lots of the little stake lights, and they're fully shielded because they have a solar panel on top. Like the cap is the solar panel. And so it's only a downlight. I mean, I'm sympathetic to not saying something, stupid and contradictory in our bylaw. I think we definitely want language, but I don't think anybody's going to be worried about people's little solar powered ground lights. Now there are very bright solar lights these days, right? I mean, you can do solar street lights.
I understand that. And so when we get to the string lights, which I would think are considered, would be solar powered accent lights. That's the way I think about them. So we have this one section about solar powered accent lights and another place where we talk about string lights. And I'm not sure we carefully defined the difference between those two and what we want to allow. In other words, it's the intent. What is our intent of what we want to allow and not allow?
Right. But
There's
string lights aren't solar powered mostly. Are yours?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. Absolutely. They're solar powered. I mean, there's a panel, and then there's a string that goes out, which we stretch between the post of our back porch.
Yeah, okay.
And there may be about, I don't know, maybe about 15 little lights on it. They're not shielded. They're the bare bulb things. They're very low power. They don't emit a lot of light.
But they're exempted under string lights anyway.
but
they're not.
Can I jump in here? Because I think the problem is that we use this term accent lights here, and then right on the same page, we talk about outdoor accent lighting that does not have anything to do with, landscape lighting or string lights. So maybe we just need to find, if what we're talking about here is landscape lighting and, low-level landscape lighting and low-level string lights.
Or pathway lighting.
Whatever, maybe we just need to use a different term here other than accent lighting.
I wanted to address something that David Trevette said. That otherwise comply with the provisions of this bylaw is superfluous here, because all the first part of the sentence is saying is this curfew shall not apply. So, one way to do this is we could just delete the language at the end to address the concern you raised, David. They have to is accent lights, just like everything else, have to comply with other provisions of the bylaw. So that you know, there's no actual need for that language, and yeah, I recommend deleting
Okay.
it.
Okay,
And all we're talking about is the curfew, not whether the light's allowable.
Yeah.
So then could we make it neater by saying all, out? I'm just wondering if we could include it up here, but let's, yeah, in the interest of moving on, we can always tweak the wording. Going back to David Trevet's goal of let's agree in principle. And keep moving. So I think looking at all of these comments, I think we have addressed all of them, with the exception of Maria's comment, which was tweaking this wording, and she was suggesting that we say directional lighting designed to accent building surfaces, blah, 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 flagpoles and similar architectural and landscaped elements shall be illuminated by.
Yeah, can you just copy everything that the whole first half of everything up through architectural and landscaped, and then drop it in before the text we have up top so we can make a comparison?
I think it's because accent light can also mean a decorative light, decorative that you look at, not decorative in what the lighting out from it does.
yeah.
Okay, so then just erase up through similar, and and it's wordsmithing, right? But I think it's probably an improvement.
Okay.
I think we had the discussion before, we don't want to require illumination. We want to say that if they're illuminated, we require this type. So right now, to say they shall be illuminated seems to say we're requiring illumination. So I thought we had come up with a wording change for that, but I don't remember what it was.
Well, now it's conditional because it says if it's designed to accent those things, it needs a shielded directional fixture. So I think it's correct. It's fixed.
I see
We
what you're
could
saying.
say
Okay.
may only be illuminated to address that point.
Oh, yeah, that's good. I like that.
A lawyer on the team.
Yeah.
Once in a while, I can contribute.
All right. Let's drive on. We're
Um,
only on page 6 of 17, but remember, Elisa put a whole bunch of non-text pages at the back, so we're actually further than that.
So let's see what 35 says about string lights. Oh, for discussion. Okay. So,
Well, so basically it's saying it's subject to the per curfew.
Yeah, but because they're not inherently not shielded, then we're exempting them from shielding requirements.
Right, and it's saying that my that I have to go out at night and cut them off, even though they're going to die out by themselves.
right.
And I have to remember to turn them on in the morning so the solar panel will collect power again.
So how about if we say shall not apply to solar power, accent, or string lights?
I think it's accent. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's necessary. I feel like I
think a lot of people will ask about that as related to holiday lights if we don't specify. So I think it's assuming we want to exempt them. But I think we should spell it out if we do. Or do we only want them do we only want to exempt them if they're solar powered?
We've seen some pretty bright ones that weren't solar powered, so I think the automatic exemption is tied to solar power, and as somebody said, that's changing as the solar cells get more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to be careful.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean,
so,
I wish there was some way to talk about total illumination, because that's really what we're after, but we just don't have a good way of specifying.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that is sort of an issue. hmm.
Well, so, but David, what we just did was extend the exemption for string lights.
Yeah.
To also exempt them from curfew. If
Yeah.
they're solar powered.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the very bright ones we saw, I mean, maybe, the very bright ones we saw were definitely not solar powered.
Right.
Yeah, they're on at 2 and 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. They're on all night.
So then where are those, like those lights that we saw, I think it was on Fuller or Coolidge, I forget. Where would they be regulated? They're just,
Well, they're exempt from shielding. I mean, I think they're basically exempt, but anything in the bylaw other than shielding is enforceable. So the curfew is enforceable. And then we just don't, I mean, future additions to the bylaw would be enforceable.
but do
The
we,
exemption is only from shielding. And we just
right,
don't have a lot more teeth in the bylaw.
what about
We
the
probably
color
want to say, directly powered here because otherwise it's in conflict with what we just did with solar powered.
but what about color temperature?
That they're not exempted from that, just shielding.
They're subject to the requirement, so they have to be 3,000 or warmer.
Oh, they are subject of, say, yeah, okay, great, thank you, okay.
So sports and recreation area lighting shall be shielded and adhere to the lighting standards of RP 6-24. Then the next sentence, sports and that goes on to the next page. Athletic field lighting shall be turned off. Well, we already dealt with that. We put it up above. So then we just end at RP 6-24, right? Recommended practice. Yeah. Okay.
All right, so that brings us to, actually, you know what, let me not delete the footnotes because we have to, we need to deal with the wildlife. And that's in a footnote. Okay, so environmentally sensitive areas.
So what's everybody's pleasure? I mean, I think we should, whatever the detail of how we construct this, right? Do we reference that map? Do we just provide a list of town-owned properties and say that that this applies to them? Is this, something that we want to include as proposed, try to address in a lesser way? Such as the one that I suggested, or I thought was, potentially on the table, which was to just apply it to the wet area and its buffer, as opposed to entire properties that contain a wetland. I mean, we've had a long discussion about it. Should we let's just go around the room, and anybody who wants to weigh in, let's just see if we can see what the sense of the committee is.
So I think if the intent is to protect wildlife, I think that just going within 150-foot buffer is not sufficient. So, you know, it is inevitable that there would be spillover from adjacent lighting into the wetland area. And so my inclination is to go forward with this suggestion, you know, as modified.
Okay,
I'd prefer, if we can figure out a way to do it elegantly, a list of the environmentally sensitive areas without relying on the fact that there's water or wetlands at all. Just list the properties that are subject to the bylaw and take the math out of it. No one has to wonder, does this one comply or does this one need count or not? Because we would have provided either a list within the bylaw or reference a list that may exist that we haven't found yet, which might be the first 3 sections of that 2025 inventory that I mentioned. Right? There are multiple sections in that I think contain properties we would probably put in this category.
I think to that point, if we're gonna meet either in part or in full with the Parks and Rec Commission in a couple of weeks, we also could ask them to weigh in on the list. I mean, you know, I'm very conscious of the fact that, in my view, these properties that are under their stewardship. I think I'm correct. I may not be correct, but my understanding is that, you know, they're the Parks and Rec commissioners, and the commission itself are the stewards of those lands, all those lands. And so, you know, we could say, okay, here's a potential list, but, you know, we're not going to necessarily defer, you know, we don't have to say we're going to defer to you, but we think this is really important. But we'd also like buy-in that you also think this is important in your capacity to protect wildlife as part of the mandate of stewarding the parks. And also I've said this before, and I think we all understand it, but I'm very hesitant to make this bylaw a referendum on the driving range lighting. And part of which I fear that it will be, right? And to a lot of people. And I'm very, you know, my next door neighbor, Len Woley, brought an article 5 years ago to town meeting asking for multi-use on the golf course, just some consideration of multi-use on the golf course. And oh my God, you know, like it was a huge crisis, and there was so much pushback about invasion of the golf course and, you know, everything else, right? And that you know, that golf course was, you know, for golf, and I'm worried about having the conversation dominated by you know, by this um, action. And we did hear from Jane Flanagan earlier that that lighting the driving range is under active consideration. It's not. It's, you know, it hasn't been abandoned as a consideration of the department and the commission. And so I'm just uncomfortable with preempting that through this bylaw, as opposed to letting it take its course.
But that's where the structure of a list could be helpful, right? Because there may be environmentally sensitive areas that Parks and Rec has no interest in using for passive recreational activities at night, and others where they do. And they could say, these no problem, these
No, but I
might
mean,
not.
but Putterham Meadows is bigger than every other environmentally sensitive area, publicly owned environmentally sensitive area in town put together, I would wager.
But to that point, then, could the town not anticipate using a percentage of it? Like, why would you could protect by intent? You could say we'd like to protect as much of it as possible. However, we want to also balance the need for use, revenue, whatever's driving the consideration for the driving range. I've not followed exactly the business case there, but there may be things that would have shown up as on the do not light list if we go the route of the wetlands map that would not be such a challenge if we didn't rely on an environmental map and instead relied on a list of properties under the control of the town.
Well, another thing I like about your suggestion from a purely practical standpoint is we could refine the language now and refer to a list and not necessarily refine the list now.
Yeah.
You know, we could say this is the intent to protect. We'd like to do this. We'd like to have it be the critical list. And then not necessarily decide the list, but make that more broaden the, you know, the voices for that conversation. Julie.
Thanks, David. I was a co-petitioner with Len on that article, so I'm very familiar with what happens when the golf course gets brought up. I do think this is different in that you're looking at an expansion of a relatively new use there. I'm sympathetic to your concern about preempting a process, but I would also say that, you know, they haven't moved the process forward either. And it's one of the most environmentally sensitive areas in town. So I don't know how we accomplish what we're trying to accomplish while exempting that. So I'm not unfortunately giving you a solution here, but I just don't see how we leave it out. Given the sensitivity of the environment there. So that's just my.
Right. And Elisa did earlier sort of say, put restrictions on migratory bird, you know, calendar periods. I think, you know, you can also, we could simply carve out the driving range. It might, I mean, there's people on this Zoom that wouldn't think that was a good idea, but we could say we're protecting, you know, 110 acres and not 120. And the pushback is, well, but then the lights on the driving range impact the entire 110 that's being protected, and that's a bad idea. And
Right.
that's true, right? I mean, it's about what are we, you know, balancing goods and politics. Jocelyn.
I just wanted to point out that the golf course is the only property in the wetlands map that is under a degree of authority from Park and Rec. The rest are under the Conservation Commission jurisdiction.
I'm not sure you're right, but I'm not saying you're not.
They're
I mean,
conservation land, and because they're wetlands, they're under the authority of the Conservation Commission. But by the way,
but I've
because of
heard
the-
I've heard a counter argument, and I do think it would be good to clarify, which is that the Parks and Recreation Commission is the steward of all of those lands, and that the Conservation Commission's mandate is really limited to protecting wetlands and dealing with wetlands issues. So I'm not sure I'm right, but I do think it would be good to get clarity on that.
Well, then someone ought to take a look at Chapter 32 of the Acts of 1981, which is the special legislation that essentially lays out what the Park and Recreations Authority is, which is essentially advisory with respect to the property uses of recreational property. But in any event, they do have something to say about the golf course. And, you know, I think this is, you know, we're in a place where this bylaw is intended to address excessive outdoor lighting, and a decision should be made. Are we going to protect wildlife or not? Because, you know, and I don't want to make this about the driving range. It's about environmentally sensitive property in Brookline. So I feel pretty strongly that this committee should make a decision about that. And I hope that you do. Thank you.
And but it's not binary.
Just a quick note, because I'd gone to the Wetlands Protection website, the town website, and that it mentions the Conservation Commission several times. Requires the act requires the Conservation Commission to review and permitting for activities such as building construction, blah, 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 blah.
In relation to what?
In relation to the wetland, it's in a sense regarding the regulating activities that come under the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act.
Right, so
but
no alterations can be made to a wetland or wetland resource area without Conservation Commission authority. And in fact, the commission had to weigh in on the drainage changes, alterations that were made at the golf course in the context of the master plan. So frankly, if a public body is going to weigh in on this, it probably should be the Conservation Commission.
But it gets back to wet areas and the designated buffers to those wet areas. I'm certainly not arguing in any respect that the Conservation Commission doesn't have jurisdiction over those lands that are
No, I
prescribed.
understand. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, David, but the trouble is the conservation bylaw doesn't reference lighting. And as I have probably poorly make clear, I don't think wildlife responds to buffer areas, right? The intent of this bylaw and the intent of the conservation bylaw in part is to protect wildlife. But the bylaw itself doesn't speak to lighting. So that's where the job of this committee comes in, I think.
Absolutely, and it is part of the purpose. But
Yeah.
all right, I mean, we don't need to go in circles, and this certainly isn't a debate, between two people.
So-
Jane, sure, go ahead. Jane?
Oh, sorry. I thought you said Jean. I do want to say the golf course and Halls Pond, other areas are not solely under Park and Rec. It is under conservation, and in particular, the golf course is under the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. So while a year ago we asked for that report to find out what they had to say and what Mass Audubon ruling on it, because it is identified as a migratory bird path, what they're ruling on it a year ago. And at our last meeting, we asked for that documentation, specifically Debbie Hatz asked for that documentation, and we were told they would get it to us. So we more specifically asked, do you actually have it? And it was a hesitant answer at best. And so the issue is, it's not just Park and Rec. It is, the golf course is a wetland. I remember Len Hooley's Warren article along with Julie's. It is a very much an environmentally sensitive area. And I do think what's important to think about is it's really 80% of the people that play there are non-Brookline residents, which gets into its own set of issues, which I don't want to argue or get into. But I do want to say is the move since Len Hooley and Julie's Warren article and others that were participated in that has been a huge effort to make sure that it is a community amenity, and there has been some movement towards that. And in the open space plan, the identification of making sure we increase the wildlife habitat and conservation of the land. And again, in Justin's 501c that he has formed similar to Halls Pond, he's identified that is an area for all to enjoy for conservation, for be able to take walks out there. And it talked about the increased habitat in his most recent announcement, saying that the golf course had fully opened. So I do think everyone, quite frankly, would appreciate guidance. I don't think this is something to hesitate over. It is a huge wildlife habitat and a significant wetland that's not just under our jurisdiction. It is under conservation. It's under the Mass Department of Environmental Protection. So just if that helps in any way, great. And if it doesn't, I'm sorry, I confused it further. So thank you.
No, I mean, I think we're pretty clear, and I'd very much like to hear from, all the voices on the committee so that we can come to a decision about how to move forward. I'm repeating myself here, but I do
David,
think.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I just found out tonight we may have to cancel August meeting. I hear there's not a quorum. So I just want to mention that.
Okay, and I may have an email back from Clara and or Tim to that effect.
Okay,
I
okay.
haven't looked at my email in a while.
Okay.
I do think the concern is a real one that it's going to be the headline of this article that it's it's banning, any lighting on the golf course or the driving range. And we
Well,
just have to understand that if that's what we want to put forward, that's going to be a lot of the conversation over the next several months.
but I would describe it as extended use because the golf course actually, quite frankly, is violating what we would call our lighting bylaw right now, in that it's very lit up, both the clubhouse and the maintenance shed and the parking lot, and none of it's shielded. So, that aside, what we're really talking about with the driving range lighting is extended and not current. So I do think that's important to think about. That's just my opinion though, but thank you.
Other voices?
What's the focused question at the moment? Whether to include anything about environmentally sensitive areas or not, or if we do, whether to delineate which ones we're talking about or not? What is the particular set of decisions we're being asked to make
Well, the first threshold is whether to add this section
at all?
that
Mhm.
basically, yeah, that says that for a certain class of lands, of properties, we're not going to allow lighting other than if there's a parking lot, or if there's,
Mhm.
a safety lighting for, if there's a shed or basically the principal or accessory buildings, it says
Yeah,
that you can
I
have
see that.
shielded fixtures on the restaurant at the golf course. Um, and other accessory sheds and stuff can have lights, and you can light the parking lot. That other than that, this class of properties cannot have outdoor lighting. And whether we want to put that forward, and I think if we do, I think that's the key question: is a majority of this committee want to incorporate that into the proposed bylaw? If we decide that we do, then we can go on to talk about, okay, how do we curate the properties that it applies to?
Yeah, so if you're looking for a poll of responses to that, to me, it feels right to have this in here. And the particular angst about the golf course, if I hadn't been aware of that either before or brought it up tonight, I would still be supporting the spirit behind what we're looking at here. I think.
And we can, as Jocelyn suggested earlier, we could put the grandfathering thing in to soften it if we do it. Yeah, David, and then Julie.
So I agree that we should have something in here like this. At the very least, we need to have something that specifically talks about environmental sensitive areas. And so my feeling is the very least, I mean, there's going to be no question, I think, about we have 3 designated wildlife sanctuaries. We can list them easily. That is at least, and that if we list them, that helps give people the idea of the kinds of places that we're talking about and the kinds of things we're trying to protect. So at the very least, we have a minimum. Then what we can go beyond that, I'm not sure how to word this, but to say we would like to construct a list that we can get agreement on. I'm not sure how to do that.
Yeah, I feel like if we're gonna, I agree wholeheartedly with Jocelyn that that the golf course, particularly at night, is a wildlife sanctuary. It is the wettest. It is the wettest part of town for sure. Among other, also, and we can always back off on a list. So I don't know that I would just list, the 3 sanctuaries. I think if we're going to go for this, we should make the list, and then we can negotiate with the various other parties about whether the list gets cut back. Pat and Julie.
David, I was just going to say, you've made the point a couple of times that we can scale something back, but not expand it, once we've filed the article. And I know this isn't the final draft anyway, but I guess I would argue for keeping this or something, expansive in for now so that we can, preserve our prerogative, even if not everybody agrees on exactly the definition.
Pat?
Yes, just again, I'm fully in support of having environmentally sensitive areas, but I have a question. If we get to the point of being able to identify what those areas are, would that be part of the warrant article sort of set in stone, or would that be a list held by conservation or parks and recreation that would be referred to in the warrant article that could be flexible, that could change over time?
I
Do you understand my
think we-
question?
Yeah, I think we could do the latter, but I wouldn't recommend it. I feel like we couldn't do it from a time standpoint. It doesn't exist unless we were to use the map or, something that's readily available. And I kind of agree. Matt made this, kind of argument. Why don't we just put in a list? I think that simplicity argues for that. And let's just lay it down on the table and let's say, and I think we also need to do a little due diligence and look at the North Brookline parks that have wetlands in
Yes.
them and make sure they,
Mhm.
like deal with the tennis court lighting and at Amory, and whether there's also lighting on the site at Griggs, even if we don't reference wetlands at all, which Matt was arguing, let's just put down a list of properties, but we could like it could say environmentally except for fully shielded lighting on principal or accessory buildings or designated parking areas, which will be the minimum output necessary for public safety, outdoor lighting shall not be permitted on the following town-owned environmentally sensitive open space properties or park properties or whatever, and then it just lists them. And we list we list Putterham Meadows and the 3 sanctuaries, if we're going to list the 3 sanctuaries, and maybe we don't, we don't get to the Muddy River, right, which is in very urban, even if it's wet and whatever. And then, the fact that, as Julie reiterated, that we can scale back during the warrant review process means that people are going to come out about this, right? We're going to get, people saying that it's overly restrictive and stuff, but it's easy to have those conversations and to fit them into the time frame between the closing of the warrant on September 3rd and town meeting in late November.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say, just in talking to people in general, is that I believe like there's really a need for public education, because I think when I talk to people about the human effects of light on health or wildlife, people I don't think have a great understanding of it. And, that is a really essential piece of preserving an area is to look at the light, to look at the light at night. And I noticed that also with Warrant Article 8, that there was a lot of skepticism about if this was something important in my little section of town meeting at that time. So I think there is like some consciousness raising and some education that's needed.
Fran, briefly, please.
Very briefly, I showed this booklet, which is the Brookline's new park passport, to Elisa. It lists 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 trails and wild spaces of Brookline, and you might look into that. The reservoir, Hoare, Dane, Fisher Hill, Halls Pond, Lars, Longwood Mall, Lost Pond, Olmsted, and Putterham Woods. The second thing is, I probably shouldn't raise this point because it might make you guys nervous. You're already getting the golf driving range people mad at this warrant article because they want it lit till 11 or 12 o'clock at night and not 10 o'clock. So you're already on their radar as a bad guy.
Yeah, I'm not worried about, I'm not worried. I'm not worried about that one. I also think we have to look carefully at the reservoir which is a huge recreational area for walkers. And it's got Route 9 right next to it, and Clyde Street right next to it, and and decide do we need, do we need the same kinds of, and yes, because it's a huge open body of water, it's attractive to all kinds of birds, and so maybe we do need to protect it, right? But I think we do need to look carefully as we put the list together.
I'm just saying that's a list of like 10 or 12 things that the town notes as trails and wildlife.
All right, so is this, do we, is this a good way to go to use this language, but to just shall not be permitted on the following town-owned properties, and then insert a list? Are there people who feel strongly we shouldn't do that?
Can I ask a question whether we reference the wetland and water resources map or list the properties? That's only one part of this suggested language. We're also saying, or any town of Brookline property abutting the wetland or water resource property of adjoining communities. So
Yeah,
I don't-
my vote for simplicity would be to leave that to a future committee and not bite that off also. But that's just one, I'm, one member of none.
I would agree to leaving that off. I like the idea of listing as Matt's list, and then we argue about that, or let the town argue with it. But I would go for the first part. Leave off the wetlands, put in the list. And I'm not necessarily worried about the golf course. That's going to be a fight no matter what. So.
All right, Fran, could you read us the list from the Blue Book again?
I have it, I can pull it up.
Either way.
Yeah, Brookline Reservoir Park, D. Blakely Hoare Sanctuary, Dane Park, Fisher Hill Reservoir, Halls Pond, Lars Anderson, Longwood Mall, Lost Pond Sanctuary, Olmsted Park, Riverway Park, and Putterham Woods.
So wait, Putterham Woods? What is Putterham Woods? I thought Putterham Woods was just the corner of Putterham Meadows.
Yes, Putterham Woods is all those trees
Yeah, but
actually
so did
right
it,
next to where they want to put the driving range on it's part
yeah,
of golf course.
it's in the corner next to the golf course, but so the golf course isn't on that list?
It is not, because the list is
Walking trails.
trails and wild spaces.
Right, and I have a friend who just spent 4 months face down because she was playing golf and got hit in the eye with a golf ball. And
Oops.
had an eye injury where she literally was like on a circular cushion with her face for 4 months. Anyway, I think again, if we're just going to sort of put out there something for the Parks Department to chew on, for all the commissions to various parties to chew on, what do we think about that list? But instead of saying Putterham Woods, saying Putterham Meadows, including Putterham Woods, and be comprehensive.
The only thing about this is, does this get at, let's go back to Halls Pond here, Fran, on what you said earlier, that there's Halls Pond, there's a sanctuary, and there's
Amory Woods, and there's Amory Playground.
Right, and there's Amory Playground. So the playground, like, could be illuminated, right? If we just have this list, what you're not getting at is the surrounding area. I mean, Halls Pond itself is pretty tiny. And so if Amory Playground is all lit up, does that
Actually, I'm not sure Amory has lights on it. I think it's just the golf course. I mean, the tennis court. And I should mention the tennis court has been redone this year, and I know there was a lot of talk about dark sky and making sure that the houses next to it weren't lit up. So they may have incorporated stuff already.
Right. But what we're saying is you can't, that, anything, any properties that are listed, dark sky pickleball lighting is not allowed. Like you can't, we're saying no lighting, period. I think it's better not to list playgrounds, right? I mean, I think we're really asking for it if we have a list that says we're making a town law that you can't have lights on playgrounds, period. I think that's tough.
And I could also point out that Reservoir Park is, I don't know if it's lit, but it certainly is a place that people walk. And just a suggestion, if you are going to include a list, have some out to say, and other places as, Conservation Department or Parks and Recs decide to add or something, so that it's not in stone.
Yeah, Ariel, I don't know if you have a comment about that. I think it's safer just to, like, here's the list and then town meeting can amend in the future.
Yeah, I mean, as you anticipated, David, I do have a comment about that. I think for reasons of democratic accountability, like I mentioned the other day, it's better to have those sorts of things set in stone, voted on or not, if by town meeting, and not be something that's delegated to non-democratically accountable bodies.
David, if I may, I do just want to make the point that you include a list and people are going to debate the list. So I am a little bit concerned that somebody mentioned I think you mentioned the golf course becoming the headline. I almost feel like people are invariably going to say, well, what about my pocket park or the Mayataki Woods by the Brookline playground, the Brookline Ave playground? You know what I'm saying? I understand the logic to it. It just will become a point of contention. So I just
I
sort of
mean,
want.
it will, and we'll spend the whole fall, writing up more and more deep down the rabbit hole, writing up more and more
Okay.
detailed carve outs. I mean, is there, they're redesigning the skating rink at the top of Lars. Has that ever been illuminated? Is that always just daytime use?
No,
It's a
No,
very
that's
small
another-
facility. It could be very, I mean, it could be very sensitively and narrowly lit and to great advantage. And it's an
Yep.
expensive facility. I'm
Yeah, no,
sympathetic
that's
to,
one of the main things about it, is night skating's a big deal there. So, yeah.
so we're just making that impossible until we actually go down, get into, sort of putting all kinds of exceptions into this one part of the bylaw.
but Laura,
Is there anything that might be on our list that is not covered by the concept of wetlands? I'm now wondering if maybe at the beginning, when we first submit, use the wetlands thing, if that in fact is the most inclusive list, because we can always shrink and provide specific lists.
But it doesn't solve the Lars problem where you have a wet property down, 100 vertical feet below where the skating rink is.
except that the skating rink already is illuminated at night.
Right,
So it would be grandfathered in.
right.
Yeah. Okay, do other people think we're better off not making a list? I mean, I agree that the list is going to draw attention, but I think it's not different than just saying anything that has water on it. It's just more transparent. The list is more transparent, so I
I
think
think
it's
the
better.
wording that Jocelyn just put in the chat could be the right balance.
What's that?
The wording that Jocelyn just
Yeah,
put in the
I
chat.
was, maybe we can get it into the document.
Hold on.
Yeah,
I
I
like your
favor,
Putterham Meadows, not Putterham Golf Course.
Well, it's
personally.
actually the Lynch. It has a lot of names. The golf pro is calling it the Brookline Golf Course, but it's actually the I've forgotten his first name, Lynch at Putterham Meadows.
Yeah,
But that's the golf course, don't we? But you don't think Putterham Meadows is actually the correct title for the property?
No,
so
it used to be David, but somehow over time it was changed.
So the issue with the passive parks is that what Alexandra pointed out is that the area in front of Town Hall is considered a passive park. And so clearly, like, that's not a wildlife area. So I'm leaning towards the wetlands. I mean, we know where the wetlands are. And if we grandfather, carve out existing lighting, then when you're not taking anything away from anybody, but you're saying from this point forward, you can, we're going to keep this for wildlife.
I
Yeah,
like
Mike, go
I
ahead.
like the idea of the grandfathering, but I think it's better to have it be a defined list, because that way we, yes, we give people something to shoot at, which is a problem. But on the other hand, it is a defined scope and we don't have to worry about whether things change over time. And I think it makes sense to make laws by reference to a set of defined properties that are not changing over time.
I think the list is by far we're gonna need it I mean, this is gonna get picked apart. And I think having the list where we can have a separate where we can really go through the fire on each property and have those public hearings and public conversations about fine tuning the list, and everybody can see it, so that by the time we get to town meeting, that each one has been tested and we can explain exactly what the conversation was and how how it went and why that property remains on the list. I think it's easier to explain to town meeting.
What if we did both? And what if we said shall not be permitted on the following town-owned properties that are identified as the location of wetlands or water resources in the resource, and then list them? Because
Good,
then you're explaining like why.
good.
Sure, I don't think that cost us anything. I mean, I don't think it's truly necessarily the driving force about why it's a huge it intensifies the the importance to wildlife for those properties, but I don't think it is the reason that those properties need to be protected. Because it's only part of what makes them wildlife sanctuaries, wildlife areas, is that they have, water.
Are there any
Do any of them not
properties-
have water? Would
Yeah,
any
so
of them-
any
yeah.
that don't meet that.
Right.
Yeah, possibly. Also, the reservoir, I don't believe has a wetland anywhere on that property,
But it's a water resource.
but it's a water resource, right?
Well, but we can use the word, as Jocelyn put in the chat, we can insert the word sanctuaries. So the sanctuaries, wetlands.
There are two public cemeteries on the list. The Old Burying Ground, which is in my neighborhood, and the Walnut Hill Cemetery. Or do we consider those habitat?
So I'm a disclosure, I'm a trustee of the Walnut Hill Cemetery, or at least I think I am.
Famously so, yeah.
Right. And I just don't think there's any issue about lighting. There will never be lighting in the cemetery.
Okay.
There's no water resource either on the property.
Yeah, I'm looking for any examples of a property that's on this open space inventory that maybe doesn't have a body of water for other reasons.
But it's a good point, because frankly, there are deer in there and fox and coyote. It is a wildlife habitat,
I
frankly.
mean, didn't you mention Longwood Mall earlier? Longwood Mall doesn't have a body of water on it.
Right,
There's,
but
there are turkeys in the
right.
trees.
But we shouldn't have Longwood Mall on the
I know
list.
that.
It's an urban park. Yeah. Okay, fine. Does everybody like referencing wetlands? I agree with the explanatory benefit of that Elisa pointed out, but I also think if we're going to list Walnut Hill Cemetery, then it sort of we're building in an internal contradiction.
Yeah.
Right, but
Yeah,
can,
we're not gonna list it though, I think.
right, yeah, I
We're
thought we just,
not.
No.
because they'll never,
It's not, there's a different, they'd have a different process to get permission to put up lights, right?
Okay, I mean, it is a wildlife sanctuary that we
But
we might want to protect. Okay, do we want to try to just like glance at the list and see if we want, and because otherwise I'd like to publish the list. So if you can just put the document back up, Elisa, or whatever. And we
David, can I'm
Yeah.
just, can I do a time check here?
That's 10:30.
Are
Yeah.
we
I think
targeting
we're close. I think we're really close.
but
Oh,
can.
okay, but if we're gonna do a detailed examination of the list,
Right,
Well, I
Um,
want to glance at it and see if we can get
okay.
permission to include it. Because I
okay.
want to publish it to certainly to Parks and Rec.
Okay, so, I'm, hold on one sec. Did I stop the share? Stop the share?
You did now.
Again. Where is that list? Okay,
Okay, should we delete okay, it's just trails and wild spaces, right?
yep,
Reservoir, Hoare, Dane, Fisher Hill, Halls Pond, Lars Anderson, take off Longwood Mall, Lost Pond. Do we need Riverway Park? Again, it's pretty urban. We could include it or not include it, but it also is sort of like half in Boston and stuff. And then Putterham Woods.
some,
The
Some of the-
Olmsted Park is definitely, it's there's a lot of wildlife there, and it's a corridor too.
Yeah, okay,
So
fine.
I think it's important.
Yeah.
someone mentioned Griggs Park.
It has wetlands in it, but I think it's also, yeah, and I mean, we could start with it on there.
So these are like small parks.
I mean, Griggs has, it has this big
Why don't we just go?
wetland in the middle with a bosque of
It has a
trees.
vernal pond. Yeah, Griggs.
Yeah.
I think we should include it then.
So, yeah, let's go back to the list because I'd like to. Okay, so I think we need to take off Longwood. My recommendation is but Griggs, let's leave Griggs off. Let's just go with the trails and wild spaces. Again, people can say, no, let's include it, but I was saying, just do the trails and wild spaces, except take off Longwood Mall and add Lynch Golf Course and Putterham Woods as a single entity at the bottom.
Okay, I'll remember to do that.
Okay, everybody okay with that? Again, we've got more meetings and this isn't final.
I mean,
It's
I
good.
just thought this was a cute little small list. And the Parks and Rec just published this a month or two ago as a park passport. Go and visit all these places.
Yeah, but I don't think, I don't.
No, I'm just saying it's a good list to start with, and then as you do check off and on things. I'm not sure about the Reservoir Park. Because
Yeah.
that's,
How about just in the interest of trying to get through this, because Miss 10 o'clock is past her bedtime, that can we, we can refine the list. I think we've got enough to kind of.
Yeah, we'll publish this. We'll meet again in 2 weeks.
Yes.
And we'll have more feedback. Okay, I think we probably only have to deal with, okay, so, yeah, when I spoke with Matt, he seemed to think that there were good reasons to have, this exception go to the planning board because they do similar things. Do you want to speak to that, Matt?
Sorry, my glasses on.
This
Yeah,
is if somebody's doing something commercial that's pretty different, they can
Yeah.
come to the planning board and get an exception.
This would be the best example I can think of that most people have a mental picture of. Not Your Average Joe's, as part of their branding, has decorative wall sconces that mount to the outside of their restaurants that say something graphically about their brand. They're fun, they're whimsical, they have color. Wouldn't be something we would normally approve, but if a commercial tenant had a very specific reason for asking for it, is there a way that they could ask for it and for it to actually be considered? So that would be, it's a fairly limited. I can think I worked for a bank. They had a custom wall sconce. I don't think it would have complied because it had light go up and down on the surface it was mounted to. But it was part of their trade dress. And so we were normally able to get it approved even in Western suburban Boston jurisdictions that don't normally do it. Because they said if you count it as signage, we'll allow it.
So the planning department did have, a comment on this.
Yeah, give us an example so I can give Maria the example.
Um, but I think what she's objecting to is, that the fixture's design and appearance specific, if it is found that this fixture's design and appearance, specific or appropriate to a particular intended use are superior. Like the superior, is I think what she's objecting to. Maybe we can use a different term.
I'm okay getting rid of this too, because I'm looking at their current trade dress, and even that brand moved away from it, probably from a cost reason, because they're custom.
What are you saying, man?
I just Googled what the new trade dress for Not Your Average Joe's is. They've stopped using custom fixtures, I'm guessing because they became cost prohibitive. So perhaps we just take this out and we don't need it. I'm trying to
We
think of
don't need
other
an
brands
exception
that
at
have
all?
that.
We don't,
Yeah.
What if we just say may be allowed by appeal to the planning board, if it is found that significant light pollution will not be created, and take out this part?
works for
I think
me.
it's a good idea.
Yeah.
I also, when we say if it is found, are we intending that the planning board or building commissioner is doing that finding? Or,
Yes, yes, the
okay,
planning board, I think, not the building commissioner.
okay. So I would say
Yeah.
if the planning board finds that, because I found that confusing.
So would they find or would they determine?
It's the same.
Determines, sure.
Okay, we're good, right?
Yep.
Okay, we got prohibitions. I don't think we have issues with them. Let's make sure.
Right, I think we went through most of these comments just because of who they're from already.
Yeah, we're not, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
oh,
the exemptions, same.
exemptions, okay, we're not done then. Let's just see what we can,
Well, no, we are, because DPW wants to be exempted, and, we've said that we're not exempting them.
okay, so we had emergency light. Yeah, but okay, well, we can, okay, emergency light, we're good with that. Let's keep going. Just let's skip over the comments for the moment.
Right, we had made an edit around the flashing lights, right, which we added like the traffic control devices, so that solved Aaron's concern about traffic stuff. Traffic signals, so we went through this yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay, but we didn't resolve the town stuff. There's
We
one,
didn't resolve the town wanting to be exempted, correct? Except that I think we have, and we keep saying that the town needs to comply, period, end of story, and, you know, I think we had broad agreement on that. We discussed it at the beginning.
No, I thought I heard some members of the committee saying that, that, you know, that they could replace, as it came up or something. I'm not sure we have broad agreement, but let's get through everything else.
Okay.
So, temporary lighting, holiday lighting, traffic control devices, we've got this somewhat loose street lighting exemption. Other than town of Brookline, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Stoops. Historical it's been changed since we last talked about it.
Right, do we need that in G, do we need, governed by any
No.
jurisdiction or authority other than the town of Brookline, right?
That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, I would like to see that just simply say, again, this is some of Aaron's wording, over which the town of Brookline lacks regulatory authority. Any jurisdiction or authority over which the town of Brookline lacks regulatory authority, to make it clearer.
You're saying any form of lighting, the use of which
Is
the town of
mandated or
Brookline-
otherwise governed by a jurisdiction or authority over which the town of Brookline lacks regulatory authority. I mean, and maybe that needs to be tweaked, but
Yeah.
it's again, I'm basically quoting a phrase from Aaron. And you know, lacks regulatory authority. Is her pushing for more precision.
Great.
And then we can also say, we heard you, DPW, look.
Well, that's part of good politics, frankly, good relationships.
All right, let's go down to J, where outdoor lighting is subject to local historic district requirements, and those requirements conflict with this bylaw. Historic requirements shall prevail to the extent necessary to fulfill those requirements. Historic fixtures shall comply with light output and CCT. This has been edited since we last saw it, 57, 58, 59. I mean, I think I don't see anything particularly problematic about this. I think we should keep moving, and we can return to it as if we need to. Okay, so enforcement. So here's my proposal for enforcement. The main thing we heard from Commissioner Shute was she didn't think police and DPW should be involved in enforcement. I think there have been comments saying that and the building commissioner told me that he would appreciate there being company and it not being all on his shoulders. So my proposal is that we just limit this. It says general bylaws by the building commissioner or their designee, or the director or the director of public health and human services or their designee. And we keep it just the way it is, but we take out police and DPW.
But the police are the only, having been one, the police are the only folks who are out there at night. So that's why I think they are frequently mentioned in the enforcement section of the general bylaws.
Yeah, but that has more to do with disturbing the peace. I mean, it's very present in disturbing the peace. It is here in leaf blower. Aaron was like, that shouldn't include the police. This is historically, all of the lighting complaints have been, I mean, it's been complaint driven. It sort of takes its time. The building commissioner shouldered most of the load. So I think it's probably okay. And then my only other suggestion was that that we not have this complaint, that we This is for leaf blowers where you've got landscape companies that are often the offender. And so it needed this bifurcation of the property owner or somebody else. But I don't think we need that for lighting. So we could, we could also not say property owner or property manager. It could just say offense, first offense, written warning, second, third, fourth, each subsequent 150, and just have that. Discussion?
Well, you asked that the first paragraph be edited. To remove police officer, right?
Yeah,
And DPW.
yeah, so general bylaws by, and then take out a police officer. And just say by the building commissioner in the,
Maybe run it by Chief Pastor. I don't know that Aaron speaks for the police department.
yeah, although do you think she would under any you think that she would object to being taken out of the chain of responsibility here? I mean, typically it's been, you know, nuisance, you're right, nuisance could be if somebody was shining some giant spotlight or something and it was causing a, but I think that the police would get a call and they'd respond anyway if it was like something egregious.
I'm
David?
kind of agnostic and I'm not a member of the committee, so I defer to the group.
David, I might point out that Chief Pastor has said in the past that it's the duty of the police department to enforce all bylaws. But taking them out, I'm sure they wouldn't mind. It's still their duty whether they're listed or not.
Yeah, I don't think the moderator would object to putting them back in if it was after the warrant, because it's not really expanding the scope. But I'll follow up and
Public
close
Works
this.
is still there. Public Works is still there.
Yeah, and then take Public Works out also. Building commissioner, their designee, and then comma.
Or
And
the Director of
it
Public
should
Health.
say or the director of public health. Yeah. So do we have general agreement that that's a good enforcement section? Or to put forward at least for 11 o'clock at night?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
We are hitting our curfew.
yeah, okay, let's move on.
Turn
We
off
have
the lights.
Just
8 minutes,
real
yeah.
quick, we might not need the preservation reference. I just snipped from their current draft guidelines, and they're very much aligned with where we're going. So I put it in the chat. They have a very simple 6 bullet point lighting section.
Okay, yeah, send it around. I can email it out to people as a follow-up.
Yep.
Okay, let's scroll down, keep going. Thank you, Elisa, for driving.
Try
Very
that.
helpful. Okay, the leaf blower doesn't have an appeal. I think going back to warrant article 8, the reason that town council recommended putting in an appeal section is that otherwise it defaults immediately to you know, to a lawsuit. And having an appeal to the select board or their designee, you know, relieves that.
So we don't have any language though.
No, we had it earlier.
Yeah.
Does anybody have a, you know, I think what we, I mean, I think we could just put not included in the current draft under appeal and then publish it that way. And because we have a month, right? We're not, and we could have that discussion with other parties. So.
We had, before we had any person who was aggrieved by a decision of the building commissioner related to this bylaw may appeal to the select board or its designee within 20 days from the date of such refusal, order, or decision. Just if you want to know.
Do we want to put that back in and we can always take it out? Okay,
I mean,
so
I think,
Elisa, let's just restore that previous language that David Trevette just read.
Okay,
And it'll
I'll
just have to say, the building commissioner or the health commissioner or their designee.
okay.
Yeah.
I'll do it in the morning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. The floor is open for final comments, and then we'll have a vote. All right, so what we're voting on, and I do want to take 1 minute to talk about the schedule, but what we're voting on is that we support this draft and present it to the public for further review and comment in anticipation of refining it and submitting it to the warrant prior to the deadline on September 3rd.
And the version that gets presented does not include the footnotes, right? It's just the draft
I
article
think
itself.
I think so. And then if we need footnotes, we could put it in an accompanying memo.
Explanation.
Yeah, explanation. And we do need an explanation before before we submit to the warrant. And I keep promising to send some previous writing to Elisa, which I said I would do this afternoon, and I still forgot to do it. But at any rate, we'll hopefully have some start of an explanation document circulated before our next meeting.
Great.
All right. So on the motion, Elisa,
Yes,
Pat,
Pat's fallen asleep.
Sorry, I am. Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
David Trevette,
Yes.
Julie,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Ariel,
Yes.
and I vote yes. So I think the evening of the 10th,
11.
I'll send out a memo. I think it's the Tuesday evening, the 11th,
Yeah.
and we may or may not be able to meet with Parks and Rec. But we could certainly invite the commissioners to come, the ones that are available to come visit us. And then I think that we had as many as 6 people available for the week before the warrant, before Labor Day weekend. And it was either Monday or Wednesday when we had 6. So Wednesday gives us all the time in the world, and then we have to publish the next day, Monday. I'll send out an email. We're good. Thank you all so much for hanging in there tonight. It's been a good run, and we're still on it. Good night, everyone.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.
Right.
Good night.
Bye.